The internet is full of half-truths and all-out lies. We've all seen them, and many people on social media complaining about it. Here's your chance to show and prove. WorldAfropedia.com is a Black-owned and operated encyclopedia. There are several thousand articles, but we need help. We can't uncover all the truth ourselves. So please, join us and become a writer, editor, or blogger for WorldAfropedia.com today. Every little bit counts. We owe it to the future generations to put the truth out there. Visit WorldAfropedia.com, the African-centered encyclopedia, a global database of African knowledge for the purpose of bringing about global African wisdom and understanding. WorldAfropedia.com.
Welcome to the HBR IdeaCast from Harvard Business Review. I'm Kurt Nikisch. Opening up about yourself at work is an act of risk management. Can you be yourself, or do you have to worry about presenting well? When your manager asks how your weekend was, how much do you share? That calculation is more fraught for members of minorities. New research shows they're often more guarded when it comes to their colleagues who are in the majority.
Let me just kind of create this little space, and I'll stay in this space, and I won't share too much information, and I'll try to manage people's impressions of me, right, by essentially covering who I am.
That's Katherine Phillips. She studied why African Americans hold back and found that playing it safe can hurt their careers. Take Marcus, a high performer she interviewed for the study. He told her he thought he was doing everything right.
You know, all my numbers are the best numbers according to, you know, kind of how we are objectively measuring things, yet I'm still not being promoted.
It wasn't until he started going to lunch with company executives and revealing more about his life outside work that his managers promoted him. His numbers didn't change. His approach did.
So I think managers oftentimes fail to understand and recognize the impact of the relationships that they have with people on how they're assessing others, that they're not just using some objective numbers.
Here to talk about those relationships and how to foster better ones across racial boundaries at work is Katherine Phillips. She's a professor of leadership and ethics at Columbia Business School, and she's a co-author of the HBR article, Diversity and Authenticity. Katherine, thanks for talking.
I'm happy to be here.
So I have to start with one quote in your article, a result of your research that surprised me. You said in your article that many members of minorities fail to understand that their career mobility can be affected by their colleagues' feelings of familiarity or closeness with them. And I was surprised. I thought that might be acutely aware to members of minorities.
Yeah, it's interesting. When we started having these conversations with people, many people would say, you know, my parents told me that it's all about hard work. It's about putting your head down and getting your work done and proving to people that you're qualified to do what you do because of the concerns that people have about the assessments that might be made about their quality. And so, you know, many people go in and they say, I don't want to be part of the politics. I don't want to get involved in any of that. I want to just do my work. And my work will prove to people that I deserve to be here and that I deserve promotion.
So just the meritocracy, the fact that anybody can succeed just by, you know, of their own volition and working hard and proving themselves, that story is internalized. But that story, it seems like your research is also showing, is not quite true.
That's right. I mean, the story that we have a meritocracy, in some ways I've had conversations with people where I've kind of concluded for myself that there are no meritocracies. It just really doesn't exist in terms of really only being able to use some objective, you know, qualifications to assess people. It very rarely happens anywhere, really. And so, you know, the fact that social relationships really matter, the fact that who you know, right, not just what you know, but who you know, is very important. I think those two stories exist out there in the lexicon of our lives. And I think sometimes people underestimate the importance of building relationships in the workplace.
You studied African American employees in the U.S. How do you think your findings might be generalizable to people who are in the minority in their workplace in the U.S. or in other countries?
Yeah. In that work, what we found was that if you are in the numerical minority, regardless of your race or your gender or any other characteristics about you, it can be harder to build these relationships. And so, we certainly believe that this research applies relatively broadly, because being the only one or being one of very few can be difficult for anybody at times. We did not do research outside of the U.S., but I certainly would think that same psychological feeling, right, of separation and lack of integration with others can occur anywhere when you're in the numerical minority.
And your research, what else did you hear from people about how they felt about opening up about themselves to their colleagues and getting to know people in the organization?
I think that sometimes people have fear. They're actually afraid to share information about themselves out of concern that perhaps the people that they're communicating with don't have their best interest at heart, and that, in fact, that information could potentially be used against them, or that, in interacting with the other person, they may actually become less close to one another as opposed to closer to one another.
Yeah.
Perhaps by sharing information, that makes them more different, makes them feel more different from the other people instead of more alike, more similar. And so there's, kind of an assumption that we have, that we all as people have, right? It's kind of a normal assumption that people who look the same will actually think the same. They will like the same things. They will, find it easier to connect with one another. And the people who look different from one another, they think about different things. They like different things. They have different attitudes, and they'll find it more difficult to connect with one another. And so we go into the interaction with these assumptions that influence the way we behave, that influence what we say, how open we're willing to be with the other person. And it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy can be created through these assumptions that we have, right, when we're trying to build these relationships.
What's the most emblematic thing that you heard from a subject in a study, or just from somebody you've talked to? Like, what's a great example of this?
I think one good example is a woman who went to a concert for her birthday, and one of her coworkers asked her, the next day after the birthday, what did you do, for your birthday? And she said, well, I went to a concert with my husband and some friends. And then, of course, the next question is, well, who did you see? And she was very uncomfortable sharing who she saw. It was a gospel artist, an African-American gospel artist.
So cracker Jesus, where the hell you been?
And she kind of said, you wouldn't know who they are, and kind of moved on and didn't really share the information about the artist. She thought about, what does that mean, that she wasn't willing to share that information? And certainly she's had colleagues share with her with no hesitation who they saw, and she didn't know who they were, who the artists were, right? So what's so wrong, right, with sharing the information about who the artist was? Perhaps your colleague will be intrigued and go listen to some of that person's music. Certainly, there's no reason to be ashamed of or to hide that information.
So recognizing all that, it sounds like the classic corporate team building stuff, the company picnics, the happy hour drinks, the quarterly celebrations, that can be challenging for people in the minority among their coworkers.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we learned in some of the early work that we did in this area, we were really trying to understand, does being more engaged in these kinds of activities, going to the company party, going to the company happy hours, and all of these things, does it really actually bring coworkers closer to one another? Does it help them to build relationships? And actually, we found some evidence that it does. Right, that there are some positive benefits of people feeling closer to one another after engaging in these kind of events. But there was a caveat to that, which was that's true, and it happens to be more true for people when they are socially similar to one another. But when people are different from one another, when they are kind of trying to interact across these kind of boundaries, it's more difficult and it doesn't lead to more closeness for people. They go to the parties, but the impact of going, they don't get that positive boost from going. And they tell us, the reason that they go is not because they think it's going to be beneficial to helping them to build relationships, but instead because they feel obligated to go, because they feel like if they don't go, people will say you weren't there, and that could have some negative consequences for their outcomes in the organization. And so ultimately the parties themselves, the activities, don't end up solving, right, this problem. It doesn't create closer relationships for people in and of themselves.
All right. So let's say you're at this workplace organized thing and it's set up well in a way that gives people places to be comfortable, but also, still bump into people across the organization or your department or whatever it is. And then you start having these conversations like, what is a good thing to avoid and what is a good thing to say if you're trying to foster good workplace relationships across race?
So one thing to avoid is that just don't make assumptions about the other person or that the other person will be familiar with particular things or not be familiar with particular things. So, for example, the question of Modern Family was so good last night and, kind of jumping into an assumption that the person actually watched Modern Family. Because, in fact, it may be a show that they don't watch, right? So not assuming that there's some universal experience that everybody should be having. So instead, it's about really having a curious orientation towards people and a learning orientation towards people. Like you really want to know, what kind of TV shows they do like, not necessarily that they like all the things that you do, because maybe they don't, and that's okay. So it's about creating a norm that difference is normal, that difference is expected, and that it is something that is embraced, something that you actually believe you will benefit from. And so asking people instead of, did you watch Modern Family last night? Kind of saying to them, I'm interested in watching some new shows. Tell me a little bit about what you're watching these days. Or is there a show that you're watching these days that you'd recommend or that you think is great, So it's about that curiosity.
What do you want to tell members of minorities to be thinking about? Because obviously if the organization sets it up well or your coworkers are asking good questions and seem really interested, that makes it so much easier, but that's not always going to be the case. The friction's going to be there. So what's your message to members of minorities?
Yeah. So I've had lots of conversations with minorities about this, and this is really where the impetus of this research started. And I think a good lesson can be taken from the experience Marcus had in his workplace, where he just took a risk, right? He took a little bit of a gamble to share a little bit about himself, more with himself, to open up. And so I actually encourage people, I say to people a couple of things. One is you don't have to share everything about yourself with everybody. That's not what this research is suggesting. It's really suggesting that there must be somebody in the organization, at least one person. Are you really telling me there's not one person in the organization that you would feel comfortable opening up to and building a relationship with, right? So think about who is around you in the organization and choose somebody to be more open with, right? And share something with them that perhaps you would normally only share with people who look like you, right? Well, what if you share this information with this person who's different from you? And I kind of guarantee people, I tell people this all the time, but I've experienced it for myself and certainly have seen it show up again and again in this research, that ultimately those risks pay off. Right, that there is benefit to actually making that connection and making yourself in some ways vulnerable in a way that brings you closer and that gets people to actually buy into you and support you and really want to see you succeed because they really know who you are.
Yeah.
Context of White Supremacy. Gus T Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Today's date, Thursday, August 9th, 2018. So I have been told. Cameo, Brother's Keeper. Where? Former guests on the cows. 10 years. This is our weekly segment, Neutralizing Workplace Racism. If we have any non-white listeners, particularly if we have any black listeners, if you have opened yourself up, made yourself vulnerable to your white coworkers who are dissimilar from yourself, and they have taken an interest in you and wanted to see you succeed and helped you progress in your career, absolutely, you are not allowed to be a spectator today. I don't care what you have to do. If you have to get on the vote line, if you have to Skype, if you have to call, if you have to borrow a phone, if you have to find a payphone, that is an adventure. Whatever you have to do, you have got to call in. If we have any victim of white supremacy in the known universe who can truthfully say, oh yeah, I've opened myself up on the job, made myself vulnerable with my white colleagues. I've shared personal information about myself, and they've taken a sincere interest in me and my success. You are duty bound, counter-racist obligation to dial in 641-715-3640. The code again, 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. Duty bound, counter-racist obligation to call in. Certainly, if we have folks that has not been your experience, you have been harmed, your white colleagues have not been interested in your success on the job, you have shared with them, and yet they have used that information against you in a Machiavellian manner, certainly you can dial in if you are having any problems and would like counter-racist suggestions. The number 641-715-3640. The code 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. The audio segment that we heard today, a listener, not a spectator, a listener, wrote in for workplace racism, and they shared the report that we just listened to from the Harvard Business Review, Ivy League, as they say. The guest, Katherine Phillips, I believe a victim of racism, non-white person. She is a professor at Columbia University, also Ivy League institution in their business school. She has victims, VGQ, Victims Guaranteed Qualification. She can take whatever stance that she wants to take about racism, white supremacy as a victim. However, importantly, she did not use the term racism in her discussion. Painfully, she used the word minority about 8 billion times in a segment that was less than 15 minutes. I don't know that I've heard the word minority used as frequently as I did there. I can only say it's 2018. Just a little bit, people use the word progress in terms of us being more codified with word usage. We should not be saying community. You cannot have a community if you are subject to racism, white supremacy. The only individuals in the known universe who qualify to have a community at all would be classified as white. No non-white person should be talking about their, possessive adjective, their community or our community. None of that. If anything, it's the white community and their continued war against non-white people. That is all. The other one, minority. Dr. Frances Cress Welsing, a key aspect of her theory, white genetic annihilation, less than 10% of the global population, the individuals classified as white. If anyone is a minority in a population sense, it would be whites. key to understanding racism, white supremacy, according to her theory, which I think is accurate. But 2018, we should not be using the term minority to reference non-white people ever for any reason, just according to counter-racist logic. I listened to that report, again, courtesy of a listener who mailed it to me. I felt so much, what word would I use? I felt such a inflated sense of black self-respect with the counter-racist work that I am attempting to do, like listening to that report from the Harvard Business Review. And I thought, wow, if these are their suggestions for black people, or I can't even say for minorities in 2018 about what to do to improve your situation on the job, this is very comparable. This is the same subject matter that we talk about on workplace racism. If this is what the Harvard Business Review is offering, oh my God, Gus T Renegade, wow, and everyone who contributes to the C.O.W.S and workplace racism, we are doing extraordinary work if we're compared to the Harvard Business Review. The only word that I can use to describe that segment, and it's longer than what you heard, I edited it down. The word that came to mind immediately, and I referenced the dictionary repeatedly to make sure, appalled. I was appalled in so many ways. I had to take notes. The word use alone, appalling. How do you do a segment that is ostensibly about racism, white supremacy, and why non-white people, minorities, won't share or are hesitant to share on the job with people who are dissimilar from them? Once again, when we deal with counter-racism, one of the things I evaluate anytime I listen to a segment, how accurate are people being with word uses? If I'm hearing anyone and they're talking about racism and they're reluctant, unwilling to use the word racism, probably not very constructive, not being very accurate. They're unwilling, reluctant to use the word whites, the problem, probably not going to be very constructive, very accurate. Using the term minority, same thing. Whole list, inaccurate terms. The beginning of wisdom to call things by their correct title. There was an alarming lack of correct terms. Accurate terms, make it plain so we know what you're talking about. Why is there a source of tension between whites and minorities and people who are dissimilar on the job? Why is that there? This is why you end up having so much confusion, because things are not being accurately explained so that people can get a complete, comprehensive understanding of why these things keep happening. This is not a problem about people being dissimilar. That makes it seem that all whites are similar. The only thing individuals have classified as white, the only thing, highlight, boldface print, the only thing individuals in the known universe have in common who are classified as white is the practice of white supremacy, racism. It's not Modern Family. It's not Walt Whitman. It's not anything else. You can be born in Australia. You can be born in Mexico. You can be born in South Africa, classified as white. What you have in common is how you treat niggers. Making statements. Either this is true or it's false. And again, compared to the Harvard Business Review, wow. My sense of what we are doing here was inflated exponentially. My goodness. Continuing. The term diversity, that's another one, not speaking accurately about what we're talking about. I have shared, and in fact, what I've heard most consistently we've been doing workplace racism as a segment for 2 years, but we've been talking about workplace racism on the program for a long time. But that was, it used to be a part of the compensatory call-in, and that was dating back at least to 2013 and maybe even before. So workplace racism has been a regular, like weekly component of the C.O.W.S for at least 5 years. What I have heard most consistently, way more than I can recall somebody saying, man, you know, I shared with Ted on the job, and it worked out great. I got excellent training. I figured out all the problems I was having. They stopped stealing my nuts. I've never heard that from a C.O.W.S listener. What I've heard consistently is people saying, wow, I did not think of Ted as a racist. I really didn't understand. I did not believe you, Gus. I thought you were talking crazy. I thought that at least some of these whites were cool and we used to talk and chat it up. We used to go out and get drinks and all of this. And then that's what I've heard most consistently over the last 5 years. People doing exactly what the Harvard Business Review suggested, and they did not get those results at all. And one of the most important things, I hate it when people are contradictory. Don't lie to me. And that's for anybody, white person, non-white person. If we're talking about racism, white supremacy, and it gets to a point where you have to start lying, just stop talking, or that should be, hey, this is a subject matter I don't want to talk about. Fine. Don't lie to non-white people about serious matters. Like, that should be bedrock part of counter-racist code. Now, the interviewer, when he asked Katherine Phillips, who again I believe is a victim of racism, when he asked, okay, so do you have any data, results, evidence that going to hang out at these work functions, soirees, barbecues, shindigs, whatever it is, do you have any evidence that this, will make things better for the minorities? And she said, oh yeah, we do. And then she said, with a caveat, if it's dissimilar people, then you don't really see those results. That right there, in my view, is so convoluted. That to me sounds like you're trying to deceive me, especially if this is supposed to be for a non-white person. That sounds like the Harvard Business Review, and that's who's most to blame. It's their podcast, not Katherine Phillips, the Harvard Business Review. And I suspect that would be racist man, racist woman, racist child who decide what's going to be on the Harvard Business Review. I could be in error. But for them to present that, to allow that to roll like, whoa, 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 whoa. What are you even talking about? Let's back up and make it plain. There's a whole lot of folks, they're not Ivy League educated. We brag about being prestigious and not letting niggers or a whole lot of other folks in, even turning down, rejecting a whole lot of whites. Are you saying that, all these diversity barbecues and let's come out and pitch horseshoes and eat hot dogs or whatever we're going to do, are you saying that that's not going to help niggers get a promotion on the job? It sounded like your caveat said, exactly, it's not going to help. It doesn't do anything. And in fact, the niggers, minorities, often feel that they're just doing this because they're being forced to go. Make that plain. Don't waste a whole lot of time with jargon. Just make that plain if that's what you're saying, because it sounds like you're trying to deceive me. And this is a major problem. We do not have time to wait. The same logic that I give behind why, if you don't have to go, forget the barbecue, because we don't have time to waste. We have serious problems, and they're probably cooking up something bigger than hot dogs to cause you problems on your job in the next 5 minutes, next few seconds, maybe. Why I recommend not attending those at all unless you're absolutely forced to attend. But the malarkey just abounded. And then the coup de grace, to get to the conclusion of the report and to be asked a direct question. What do you say to minorities who are looking for suggestions on the job, having problems? What do you say to matter of fact, and let me pause. Let's put this real world practicality. If you look on the Facebook page, you look on the Twitter account for the C.O.W.S, if you see the image for today's broadcast, Neutralizing Workplace Racism, it is an image from the LA Times, a screenshot. The report, you can check it online. LA firefighter files discrimination suit saying his equipment was smeared with feces. Workplace racism. Retired firefighter. Weekly basis, we find something from the fire department. So back to the Harvard Business Review. So we ask minorities, firefighters having feces smeared on their property by their white coworkers who are dissimilar from them. What is your suggestion to minority workers? Your suggestion is be willing to share. Find at least one person in the organization and share something with them that you would only share with someone who is similar to you. Couldn't even just say that you would only share with another black person or share with another non-white person. Find a white, couldn't even say that. Even that's got to be presented in convoluted language. That's your suggestion. 2018, Trump White House, this day and time, system of white supremacy. That's the suggestion that we get from the Harvard Business Review. I was absolutely appalled. And then I said again, wow, my sense of black self-respect has expanded exponentially. If this is the best that they have, wow, the cows, we are doing great work. Obviously, it's pitiful and not enough because the problem has not been solved. But wow, the folks who participate in workplace racism, you have exponentially better suggestions and logic, practical logic to offer and explain to help other non-white people. The Harvard Business Review, again, the victim of racism being interviewed was Katherine Phillips from Columbia University, their business school, also Ivy League institution. Woo! If we have any listeners, mandatory, you are obligated to dial in if you have had the experience of allowing yourself to be even more vulnerable. You've shared with with whites on your job, at least one, and they have helped you, taken an interest, a sincere interest in your development, and helped you succeed, taken an active role in seeing you succeed. If that has been your experience, obligation, counter-racist obligation to dial in the number 641-715-3640, the code 564943 pound. Press star 61 if you would like to participate. Certainly, if folks have problems, that's what this broadcast is set up for. Certainly dial in, and myself, the callers, we will be willing to offer counter-racist thoughts, suggestions on how you can address your situation. But I thought that was appalling. I'll say it again. But I thought that warranted comment. It's particularly if what I am saying does not make sense, if what I am saying is illogical, irrational, if that totally counters what your experience has been, then please dial in and, let's get that on the record. But I at least thought that was worthy of commentary and on topic. Since this is workplace racism, I felt like we're not even deviating. People did write in, so I have commentary to share as well. Several people actually wrote in, so I'm going to add their commentary as we proceed. But I did want to make sure that we at least started with what we heard from Professor Phillips and the Harvard Business Review. I think I even posted this online early in the day on social media. If folks were able, if you're not able to tune in on time so that you can hear the clip from the beginning, listen to it in advance or read the transcript in advance so that you can come prepared to not be a spectator. So do we have anybody who can truthfully say that I've made myself vulnerable? Gus T, at least in my experience, what you're saying is not accurate. It has not been reflected in my life and times on the plantation. I shared with whites and they hooked me up on the job. I'm doing great and would encourage other folks to find them at least one white person on the job and do the same. If that is you, get on this here line immediately. Do we have such a person who can truthfully say that? I'm going down to open lines up. Paul, don't say anything if, that is not you, because I suspect we should have a whole lot of people to say, oh, yeah, that's not me. Do we have anybody who can truthfully say, yes, I shared with a white person on the job and they did right by me. There was no racism at all. Anybody can truthfully say that? I would like them to speak first right now. I'm still trying to open up a few lines to make sure that we have space. So is there anybody truthfully say, yes, I shared with white people. They looked out for me on the job. They were not racist. Things are still working out fabulous, in fact. Anybody can truthfully say that? All right, grand. And before we even move, if such a person is on the line and you're in a position where you just can't speak right now, maybe it's loud where you are, maybe you're still at work, maybe that was, a part of the bargain, they helped you out, but you got longer work hours, so you're not quite off your job. I will announce again until we get ready to go off the air. If you're listening online, if you're listening someplace else, if you're just streaming, if you overhear it on someone's computer, if you are a non-white person anywhere in the known universe, and you can truthfully say, I shared with a white person on the job, I made myself vulnerable to another white person on the job, and they did right by me. I got information, I got a raise, they helped my career path in a constructive manner without a pinch of racism, not even one racist joke. Duty bound, it is your counter-racist obligation to get on the line. If you have to say, or you can email. I would rather have your voice on record. That would be much better than an email. But at minimum, email before we go off the air. If you drop me an email, I will even give you a ring on my line so that we can, three-way or whatever we have to do. But if that is truthfully you, I would like to get that on the record before we go off the air. Before we get to any personal anecdotes or what have you, if there are any thoughts, since I did tell people they could check this article out beforehand, if folks have any thoughts, or if people even have said, hey, I recall sharing on the job and it did not work out for me, that would be constructive as well. Any thoughts from people who heard the sound clip, and any thoughts you wanted to add, or if you have an experience about sharing with whites on the job?
Can I be heard?
Mr. Steele, good to hear from you, sir.
Yes. I was close to saying, there may have been a suspected racist that has helped me out on the job without a hint of racism. But with that caveat, without a hint of racism, it would have to be this person doesn't qualify. This person has helped me out with recommendations. Has helped me get raises, has helped me have higher starting salaries at some positions than I would have gotten without his input. So this person has helped me. However, there was one time that I actually went over to this person's house, and we're just taking a look at the property or whatever. And in one of the rooms, there was just a gigantic Confederate flag. And he said, "Yeah, that Confederate flag there. Yeah, that don't mind that. That's not about hate. That's just about me being able to say whatever it is that I want, do whatever I want to do." And then he took a sip of his beer, and at that point, I realized, I'm never ever coming back to this house again. So, I've been able to maintain a very courteous, professional relationship with this person. Whenever I need a suspected racist on the phone to say some kind words about me, I can usually count on this person to do that. But I do know that when he goes home at night, he has a big, gigantic Confederate flag just hanging freely. And mind you, I met this person in Chicago, and this person's family is from Chicago, and I think they're Italian and Polish, so they have no ties to the Confederacy, no geographic ties to the Confederacy. I believe that this is just an allegiance to white supremacy that he was expressing. But there is a white person that I could say has helped me, but without a twinge of racism, absolutely not. That does not exist. No.
Much obliged for sharing, Mr. Steele. Symbols of white supremacy. Thomas in New York was just referencing that. Dr. Welsing has a whole section on that in her in the ISIS papers, the Grandcester. And whites can just let me get one more thing in real quick, Mr. Steele. Whites can be helpful on the job and in many other areas. That is not anything that is astounding or surprising. If you dominate the entire planet, they can provide an array of assistance with lots of things. They could end racism right now if they wanted to. I mean, that's the amount of help they could provide. So white people, them being able to assist a Negro or 20 million Negroes, that is nothing. They could do that and about 50 million more if they were interested in justice. You were going to add something, Mr. Steele?
Yes. There was one point in our, I guess, professional relationship where I believe he was taking me to lunch for some sort of team lunch thing. And I was riding in the car with him, and the rest of the team were riding in their own cars. And he leaned into me one time and he said, "Hey, you notice all these Muslims around?" He wanted to, I guess, include me in his Muslim thing. And then he said, not all Muslims are bad, but I heard 60% are terrorists. And and he said this without a hint of irony, or without a hint of anything in his voice. He just said it very matter of factly, and I just I just nodded right along. I didn't really have anything else to say about that. I just I listened to what he had to say, and he was just going on about the population of Muslims in Europe, and Sharia law, and this was years ago. This was way before any sort of Trumpism or anything like that, or any sort of Trump run for office. So yeah, this was just something that he talked about, and I believe his family are firefighters. I believe that is something that is close to his family. They are Polish and Italian, so, and connected to a large metropolitan area. So I do imagine they have extensive ties into municipal government, and I think he would be characterized as one of the good ones, or one of the liberals, or one of the less racist people in this environment that I'm in. So yeah, it's very, very real out here. I'm going to mute my line.
Appreciate that, Mr. Steele. Did we have any other folks? We're not going to spend too much time on the audio segment. Is that Thomas in New York?
Yes, Gus. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Good evening. Good evening to all the callers. I hate the word minority, because a minority, when you look it up in a legal sense, of course, it can mean people who hold a higher weight, more people as far as votes. But it's a state or a condition of a minor, infancy. That's the legal definition of it. So they're saying that you're a child whom adults should make decisions for you. And I believe Mr. Fuller speaks all the time about whites are the only ones allowed to be adults in a system of white supremacy. Black men, you're not a man, or you're a girl or a boy, if you're black. That's all I wanted to say about that. I do have some workplace racism now.
I'm sure we all do. Much obliged, Thomas in New York. Did any other thoughts on the report, or folks have anything that they wanted to share about their own experience of opening themselves up to be vulnerable with their white colleagues, coworkers?
Hi, Gus.
Stacy in the UK, 1:46 a.m. Friday morning. Wonderful to hear from you.
And you and the rest of the callers. I, like probably many other people on this call, on this program, have no positive experiences of how sharing has benefited me, or certainly sharing with suspected racists. VGQ to Mr. Steele, I'm not so sure that what he described is actually an example that fits with the discussion, or that the research and what it was implying. As you've said, I do think there's always an example of a suspected racist that can be kind, in inverted commas, to a victim. I suspect that particular person just hasn't revealed themselves to Mr. Steele as yet, even if he did find the Confederate flag in the home. I think one thing that, listening to that whole interview, I didn't read it in advance. I just listened to it, so I will find it and listen to it. But actually, I just found it really painful to listen to, quite frankly. And the question that came to mind, which is one that you have often asked on the book club, is why do racists, promote certain bits of research, and why do certain research projects secure funding? And obviously, I think she was from Harvard anyway, so is I suspect an extremely racist supremacist organisation. And I found it really dangerous, actually, because the only thing I took away from that is that if you are a non-white person, more confused, you are going to end up blaming yourself for the racism that has been enacted against you. It is going to serve to brainwash a few more victims of racism, and also it is a tool for helping racists continue their racist practice, and it is everything I've ever thought of rolled into a 2 or 3 minute clip of those so-called the benefits of diversity initiatives in the workplace and how useful they are to non-white people, and I guess how useful they are to supremacists. I do have some update, Gus, but I'll come back at it later on in the program.
Much obliged, Stacey in the UK. I did say anywhere in the world. I actually said anywhere in the known universe, so certainly anywhere in the world will qualify. Any other folks' comments on the report from Harvard Business Review?
Yes, can I be heard?
Yikes. Was there a female caller in there?
Yes, sir.
Oh, her too. Yeah. Dang. Let's get Ivy.
A couple of us.
Yep, let's get Ivy. I'm just pick them out as we go.
Okay, thanks, Gus. Greetings to you and greetings to everyone online. Oh man, as far as the clip, I'll just quickly say, it was to me it was white identification, and it was being suggested that we identify with whites, and of course sharing your personal information with them is very dangerous. I wouldn't be surprised if she were deceived and misled to give this advice to us by the whites so that they could use it against us. And I would say, from personal experience, man, these Klan members, man, they will use anything. I remember telling a coworker, just in front of a Klan member, that's a suspected Klan member, I just told her in front of her that I had backed in for the first time in terms of the driving, backed in a parking space rather than pulling in. And she interjected, or maybe it was after the person I was talking to had made her commentary. She said, well, the only reason why you were able to do that is because the parking spaces are big. But if they were smaller, then you wouldn't be able to do that. I didn't say nothing. And then one time I was putting on lip gloss in front of her. And she just, later on, she was just like, where's the Vaseline? And she was just saying that just to antagonize me. So something that small of just putting on lip gloss in front of her, of course, so I wouldn't have chapped lips, she decided she wanted to use that as well. And also, she's a maximum racist aggressor as well. And that's it. I'll mute my line. Thanks, everyone.
Much obliged, Ivy. Let's see. I think I heard Draftomania in there as well. Draftomania, were you also on the line?
Yes, I was. Thank you. As far as not knowing any of that, I have been helped, but the clip that I heard from Nellie Fuller, and as far as him talking about them baiting you when they act like they're doing something nice for you, and it's really not. That's been my experience. I have had suspected race soldiers go as far as take me to the drug test, literally get me from the street to, as I'm walking down the street, to take me on an interview, to give me the job, to make me look like I got the job. And then when I get on the job, I'm being harassed and going through nonsense. I had this race soldier. She was a director. She literally took me to the to LabCorp for drug testing. And when I got on the job, she was a terrorist. She terrorized everybody on the job. So, no, I have not met any that I know of that even though they do nice things for you. I've had many of them. I had one recently. He was a gay white male. Oh, they're good for. I was listening to a clip about how the gay white men act like they're so chummy with black women, and I was falling for it, going out with him, doing different things with him, and the whole time he was just using information and taking it back and using it against me. And I believe that he is one of the reasons why I'm no longer at that job right now also. And that's all I have, and I will mute my line. Thank you.
Much obliged, Draptomania. I can hop in and share myself. I say that about, it's not like Gus T. I didn't come out with all this information. I used to do that too. I've talked before. I was on jobs. We would hang out. I would do the birthday parties. Let's go do lunch. We would even go I don't even know what you would call it, like brunch, or just go, there would be like a restaurant, like maybe 5 blocks or so from where we worked at when I was in California. We would go there, get snacks, drinks, tequila shots, the whole nine, chat about life and everything. Time to get a raise, no help at all. Scheduling difficulties, no help at all. I can say that consistently. I didn't suspect any of these folks. This was, I didn't know about Mr. Fuller's work, hadn't read his work, anything like that. Super confused. Did not suspect any of them of being racist. Shit, didn't have any boundaries about, don't share this or don't talk. Didn't have any of those rules. Didn't have any sort of code at all, and they were of no help at all, especially for critical, important things that you need on a job. Can I get an extra nickel, an extra penny? No help at all. Were there other female callers who dialed in that we missed?
Not female.
I heard lots of...
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir. I heard you. Just making sure we nabbed all of our female callers. There were a bevy of male callers, I heard. Did we get all the females? Think so? At least for the time being. The male caller, 7713. Do you want to go ahead?
Yes, sir. All right. So I saw when you initially posted the article on Facebook, and at that point I responded to it. When you posted it, I did not listen to the audio. I read it completely through instead, and thought to myself, like Katherine Phillips, that seems like a white name. So I didn't really pay it too much attention at that point until you played it at the beginning of the broadcast, and I was a little unfortunate that it was a black female who did this study and came to these conclusions, for which I felt there was nothing being said other than just a bunch of words, and I guess it is what it is, I suppose. And to me, it was very interesting as I was reading through it that most of the time she said, like you alluded to, saying things like diversity, and that it's not a diversity problem, it's not a race problem, even though the very interview at the very end, he said, thank you so much for telling us about your research and giving us some practical tips about what people can do to better, for better workplace relationships across race. He was asking a question, but she never really gave a question And I don't think I think she only said the word race one time in the entire article, saying that it was not about race in one of her responses. When I think back to currently I work for the county where I live, and there are constantly parties happening in the South. People just love to eat, people love to have parties and stuff like that, and that's fine with me. I personally try to go out at least once a week with a different person, whether it be a white person or a black person, just to try to better get to know the people who are around me and who I work with. But I personally try to avoid going going after hours with anyone from work who is not a non-white person. Matter of fact, I think there's only been about 2 or 3 people from my job who are both black that I've hung out with. Outside of that, I think one time I went to an after-hours event to a bar. I did not drink myself, and it wasn't weird or anything, but one woman who usually doesn't talk to me was drinking and was talking to me profusely about nothing. So when I see this article about trying to get minorities, as she kept saying, to have better interactions with white people at work, I couldn't help but to think to myself, I constantly have interactions with white people at work. I even try, and I do my best to actually meet as many as possible and actually go out to lunch, actually get to know these people, but it's never produced an iota of a positive result for me as far as I can tell. Not to say that I've gotten in trouble or anything, or that I've been harmed. Of course, I could have been harmed and not been aware of it, but I don't see nothing positive that's come out of any of these kind of interactions as far as I can tell. And I'll stop right there.
Context of White Supremacy. Sobriety would be best. Absolutely. On the job or elsewhere, especially if you got to attend, or if you choose to attend any of those functions on the job. But much obliged. Thank you for sharing it. I think that's a great code too, if it's finding other non-white colleagues, and maybe we can do some sort of lunch thing or what have you to network, rendezvous with folks that you're on the job with. I think that's a great code too. We talked about that lunch thing before too, where some people have said they're.
I will say this though. Sorry to interrupt you, but the non-white people that I do hang out with outside of work, when I try to have these types of conversations with them, unfortunately, they are of the belief that there are some good white people, and our conversations usually end right there, and we change the subject.
Not to be shocked, nothing to be surprised about. Many people, many victims are very, very confused about racism. You can put Gus T's name at the top of the list. But we talked about that lunch situation before in terms of if you're on a job and you feel like, I think our caller in Michigan and some other folks have said they've been on jobs where they feel like if they turn down every single request for lunch or whatever it is that they want to go out and do, that might harm them, that might be used against them for a promotion or a job. And my suggestion consistently has been, you can work out a code for that too. If you're on a job where you feel like you've got to participate at some level in those codes, I would have a code about that too. I would not do every lunch invitation. I would have a code. Maybe I'd do every 1 out of every 3, 1 out of every 4. That way they can't say that I never go. I just don't go to, most of them. I do about one every month, 1 every 3 weeks or so. That way I minimize, and then I'd be very codified about what I talk about, what I don't talk about when we go out to lunch, and obviously no alcohol. Other folks, if you still have comments, retired firefighter, folks who were going to comment on the report that we heard at the beginning, and then we'll get to what personal anecdotes and problems and such. Retired firefighter.
Yes, sir. To report on the report, I would say based on my experiences with the fire department as well as even before with employment and or college, which is a form of employment, I have never, ever seen a relationship with a non-white black employee with a white employee, no matter what rank, where that white person ultimately did not have a agenda. The agenda may not conspire, may not come into being immediately, and that's probably the more powerful out of the whites would be. But eventually, in time, that white person would impose that upon that non-white person, whether it's a situation to whereas that I put you in this position. Now it's time for you to make it very difficult for other non-white people, especially non-white black people, if that's a black person that I'm talking about, as far as a non-white person, or some sort of, if anything, it can be a situation where that white person is looking for some sort of racial loyalty from that non-white person to basically either state emphatically that so-and-so white person is all right, or just by silence in the witnessing of that white person practicing racism, just by that non-white person being silent. That's sometimes is affirmation enough for that white person. And they are able to intimidate us like that, especially when we have, quote unquote, played with them, going to bars, literally playing with them on the softball team that the job has. They expect something from you in that light, whether that non-white person is aware or unaware of it. That's been my experience. And I also have something to report as far as workplace racism. Thank you.
Smeared feces on the black firefighters' property.
Oh, I can tell you, Gus. Workplace racism as a program is very, very important, very significant. You can do a whole Thursday on nothing but racism that comes from the fire service. You could do that every Thursday, and it would last the entire 3 hours.
I think you could. Well, I don't know about 3 hours, but I think you could do a hefty chunk on firefighter is accused of smearing feces on a black firefighter's property. I mean, wow.
Nothing new, unfortunately.
L.A. Times. And again, the people read or check the news. I won't say read the news, but you should definitely check the news. I don't, or I do know, because many of them listen to the program. I think that is nonsense. It's not as appalling as what we heard from the Harvard Business Review, but it's pretty close. The people who advocate, you should just never check any of the news reports, whether it's reading or listening to material or watching something on television. That is certainly not the position that the Grandcestor Dr. Welsing took. That is certainly not the position that the late Dick Gregory took, and many others, Mr. Fuller, many others. That is certainly not the position that they took. Minister Malcolm X, a lot of the folks that we, claim to have some admiration for. That is not how they spent their time and energy. They invested a lot of effort in trying to figure out what's going on, getting information, however they, chose to get it. I'm not saying you got to read the paper or whatever, but be informed. And racism, white supremacy, directly or indirectly, that's what's dominating the news all the time. L.A. Times, firefighter, smeared feces, black firefighter in the L.A. Times right this week. Other folks who dialed in, was anybody that we missed before we move on from the report article that we started
Can I
with?
be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, yes. Good evening, Gus. Good evening to all the listeners and callers. Codified software developers here. The first thing I thought when I heard that report was hogwash. I've had the experience when I was even more confused than I am now of sharing personal information with a white person in a predominantly non-white work environment. I was actually working for the Milwaukee Public School District at the time, and the department I worked in was predominantly non-white. And this white female was very bad at her job. She didn't do her job very well. And I shared some personal information, and she, of course, used that against me. went into a crying spell in the principal's office, and I got in trouble, and she got promoted. So I would highly suggest not sharing personal information. And as far as getting help from whites, there is a superior white supremacist at my job in the form of the lead architect who has given me stellar reviews. And he is still a white supremacist. He is still a racist. He still practices racism. So I get what I can get, and I move on. Thank you. I'll mute my line.
Get what I can get and move on. Keep it codified. Much obliged. Software developer in Wisconsin. Woo! We will do one hogwash. That word is dear to my heart, right up there. I was appalled, but hogwash would have been a good descriptor as well. I guess we'll take one more on the report that we got from the Harvard Business Review. Any final thoughts before we move forward? Oh, did we nab everybody? Everybody got their thoughts in Harvard Business Review? Did we get everybody? Oops.
Hey, may I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Hey, how you doing? I'm kind of late. I just called in. This is victims from out of New Jersey. Are we talking about a specific workplace issue, or are we talking about whatever concerning workplace racism?
We were talking about an audio segment that was dealing with just suggestions. It's difficult to explain. You'd have to go back to the beginning to hear the article. We were talking about an audio segment that was dealing with workplace racism at the beginning that you didn't get to hear. You can check it out in the archives, or you can just read it. I posted it on Facebook. You can read the transcript if you are interested.
Okay, I'll check the earlier recordings on my way to work later today. But I heard the female caller. She was talking about sharing information with coworkers. An issue happened. Just to share, something happened with my father. My father works under the table at a moving company, so he works with different drivers, out-of-state drivers. So he was working with a driver. Suspected white supremacist, and he invited the drivers to his home. And once he came to my father's home, and he's saying that, my father had a pretty nice home. My father was showing off his new big screen TV. After that truck driver, who was, anytime he was in town, would hire my father for work. Once he entered the home and seen, that my father wasn't living in squalor, never called him again for work. So that was a lesson learned, that I learned from sharing information with suspected white racists. Also, I just wanted a suggestion. There's another victim on my job, really not codified, often uses the N-word openly on the workplace. Also may make, jokes, racial jokes around whites. Give you a point. I'll give you an example. It was a nice day and it was hot outside, and white female was checking in his paperwork, and he makes a statement, well, us blacks, we ain't got to worry about the sun. I cringed, so, I mean, should I say something to this particular victim, or just, just stay to myself, stay codified, and if he says anything that's kind of like crossing the line, just walk away? How do I handle a victim on the workplace that's not really codified?
My view, much obliged, caller in New Jersey. I've been there. I guess I'll deal with both of them. The first one with your dad situation, we talked about that on workplace racism for years, and talk about sharing. That's such a great illustration of the folly, at minimum, of sharing with whites. Wow, that is loud. Okay. The folly of sharing with whites. We talked about that. We've had a number of listeners who've called in and talked about whites saw that they had one too many corn cobs. Like, whoa, how did you get that vehicle? How did you get two vehicles? How did you, I mean, you're not living in a shack? Like, what is going on? You have more than two spoons in your house? Like, we have heard this repeatedly, and the exact same pattern. Like, that's grounds for termination. Or I think we even had some folks who say, we're paying you too much money. You would take a vacation like that. We've had some callers who, I think they said they posted some pictures on Facebook about their vacation or vacation plans. And unfortunately, some of the race soldiers that they worked with, they were friends with them on social media, and they could access that information, and sharing horrible. Specifically, allowing any of the whites that you work with, and it might even just be whites, period, but especially your white coworkers, you do not want them to be invited to your residence. Like, in my view, that is total danger. Oh man. I mean, this is 2018, so I mean, a lot of whites, it's not going to be any secrets on the plantation. If they really want your address and all that, they could probably just go to the race soldier or human resources and get your home address. But I mean, an invitation to your residence, inside your residence, like, oh my goodness, like, no, absolutely not, under no circumstances. And again, these are just things, you know, I didn't know either, being a victim of racism. But I'm not surprised. That's unfortunate what happened to your dad, but tons of black people have experienced the same thing. With the second situation, which you were talking about on your job, we've had that come up quite a few times as well. I think if the person is just making like silly remarks, like the latter one where you said black people don't have to worry about being out in the sun or whatever it is, something like that, I would probably just ignore that. You know, like, that's not, I'm not into, we should not be on the entertainment committee. We talked about that before, but that's not the sort of thing that, you know, would ruin my day. Like, I'm not going to be upset for the next 30 minutes because of something like that. Now, if he's saying the nigger on the job, if I heard correctly, or things like that, I would address it not from you saying that is getting on my nerves and why don't you shut up, man. I would, if I was going to say anything at all, it would be, man, you might get fired for doing that at some point. These whites, they might, you know, I might not say it in this way, but the general spirit of it would be, they might, you know, sit around and snicker and act like they tolerate that today. There might come a day when they say, we are not going to tolerate that, and that'll be our excuse for getting rid of you. That might be about all I would have to say about it. The rest of it, like, you know, whatever, I would ignore it, as long as they're not, you know, doing something to directly mistreat me or what have you. If they're just, you know, doing whatever they're doing, saying whatever they're saying on the job, I would just ignore that and, you know, keep it moving for the day. That's not anything that would warrant further commentary if I was going to address it at all. Any listeners have suggestions on how they would deal with the latter? That I'm sure has to come up a lot. The code. Anybody have a code for how they deal with another victim of racism on the job who's not very codified?
Can I be heard?
Retired firefighter.
Well, I'll just say I did have an experience that I mentioned it on the program years ago about a non-white black coworker who wanted to put on a gorilla mask at a battalion meeting. A battalion meeting would simply be a meeting with various rescue and fire units all at one station. It's somewhere around maybe about 25, 30 people would be there with the chief in charge, you know, giving information, maybe some union information or something like that, or something new coming through the fire department itself to inform us on. And a lot of times non-white black people would, various ones of us would take that as Comedy Central. And he was walking ahead of me with this gorilla mask. What I did was, you know, this was a judgment call. I basically, he knew something about me. I knew something about him. And I asked, can I talk to you for a second? Type of thing, and just express myself to him that I would kindly would like for you not to take that gorilla mask in there and put it on, because I may feel that I have to say something in defense of you, and I don't want to do that. and he thought about it. He thought about it and put the mask back on the truck that he came to the station on, and that was the end of that. Now, whether he did it some other time, I don't know, but not in my presence, as far as that concerned. Thank you.
Much obliged, retired firefighter. I can even add from experience just from the last like 72 hours. Can't do a program without talking about yoga. So I've mentioned lovely black female is also in teacher training with Gus T, which will be concluding next week. We are so close to the end that the book club is going back to normal time, 8 p.m. tomorrow for Bara Coons or Neil Hurston, back to 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, normal time for the book club. Teacher training ends in 10 days, all done, and I will be certified yoga instructor. But on the way to the finish line, the lovely black female, we were hanging out in class, and I said something. Anyway, we were having conversation, and for whatever reason, the black female, her response was talking to me. She called me a nigger. I cringed at that moment, and this is Gus curmudgeon. This gets to a lot of the heart of why I don't want to do physical adjustments, and why it has been curmudgeon for 10 years to have great, pleasant black female who is willing to talk about racism, white supremacy, honestly. Doesn't say minorities, but being called the N-word, I have not been, or being called nigger, excuse me. I have not been around a black person who has called me nigger in so long. I was stymied even by the, wow, to be referred to in that manner. First time I was a little, off balance. Second time I'm going to have to say something. Hopefully there will not be a second time, but if there is a second time, I am going to have to say something, and that is something that I would encourage. If there is any non-white, really anybody, but even if there's a non-white person, I think it's black self-respect, and I think it's just general quality workplace code to not have people name call you at all. Any names. My name is, boop, and this is what I want to be called every time, and certainly there should never be a reason, like ever. I say nigger on the program from the perspective of whites, and I think that's important because too often their terroristic conduct gets sanitized. You do not ever, and if somebody can, correct me, you do not ever just hear me casually calling, retired firefighter, or I be like, oh, this nigger here. I do not do that. I do not encourage that. I think that's totally, and it's just name calling another black person and a lot of anti-blackness. So I would definitely, if a non-white person was calling me nigger, or any derivation of the word, I would have to say something about that, that is not acceptable. Please call me by my name every time. If you feel like you have to call me a nigger, I'm probably not going to have a whole lot to say to you. Any other suggestions on how you deal with a victim who's a bit less codified in the workplace?
Can I be heard?
Thomas in New York.
Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, my codification on and off the workplaces, I don't deal with people that's engaged in uncodified behavior as far as being friendly with white people or in relationships with white people or anything like that at all. I tend to I stay away from them if they're black, and especially on the workplace, if they're in a position where they're hanging out with white people, going to lunch with them and doing things like that. I stay as far away from that black person as possible. And, that's just my codification in that scenario.
Minimize contact. Any other folks have a code that they, this is what I use. This is my default practice. If there's a non-white person on the job who is a little less codified.
Can I be heard?
Codified software developer, Wisconsin.
Hi. So I take the position that this is, as Mr. Fuller said, United Independent, and whatever that victim wants to do in terms of how they speak about race or racism is on them. I was just recently having a conversation with a non-white Indian male that I know about the non-white Indian male at my job, and he basically said the same thing. Like, that's on him. He's an adult. He should know by now that this behavior that he's engaging in is not beneficial to him, and he should be making that change, and that's kind of the way I see it. So I don't say anything, and I've found that as long as the point is that you're not engaging in the behavior. If his behavior is affecting you, then you need to say something. But if it's not affecting you, I mean, I don't know why you would have a responsibility to say anything. So I would just ignore it, unless it was affecting me, and then I would probably address it. But that'll mute my line.
Logical. Any other suggestions before we move on? Grand. Other folks, if you dialed in, if you have commentary, if you have your own problem on the job, you'd like counter-racist suggestions, or if you have figured out some codification that works well to solve problems, you should definitely speak up.
Can I be heard?
Thomas in New York?
Yes. Well, the word dirty, is that in the word, Gus? Dirty?
Yeah, I'm still a flood victim and displaced from my library 8 months in. Any of the folks that are listening, if you have your word guide handy, can you please give a check to see if the word dirty or dirt, any derivation, is in the word guide? Much obliged.
Yeah, I was talking to the black receptionist at work, and we were discussing Chicago and the shootings that took place, that the news has been letting us know about. So I showed her a video that I had, which was a 14-second clip of one of the shootings. I got it off of one of the YouTube or one of those type of things. So either way, we were both like, man, this is crazy. As we were talking about it, a white female walks in. This white female generally never speaks to us, but she asks what were we talking about. So my codification was nothing, and the receptionist says, oh, we were talking about Chicago, and she says, oh, it's so dirty there. So I said, wow, I said, I was there, it wasn't dirty, So she says, oh, well, it's just dirty. So she says, well, what about it? So the receptionist goes on to say, oh, we were talking about the shootings that took place. So I was just cringing, like, why is she talking? But nonetheless, this white lady says, oh, they're dirt, and she walks away. So I just thought, man, what? I mean, I took it like they're black. It's dirty because it's black. Another incident, as I told you, on vacation, what I noticed in all these high-end establishments on the, I keep saying boardwalk, but I guess it's a strip. I'm from New Jersey. I'm thinking Atlantic City. Either way, there was this gentleman. I would say if I had to guess, he's probably Hawaiian or from the Samoan Islands, because he was a dark-skinned guy with not very coarse hair, but more coarse than the regular Asian, and he was much darker than the regular Asians. He could have been a Filipino, but nonetheless, he was approaching us as you walk past. They're trying to sell you some type of timeshare, so we kind of listened to him, and we kept walking. And the next day, we go outside, and he's in the same place, and this time he has a white man with him, and the white man, approaches us, and, this guy remembered my name and everything from our first conversation, the guy, the other guy, the non-white person. So nonetheless, the white guy kind of, starts his sales pitch, and he makes it very known that he works for me, and, I have these other people inside the hotels that's doing this, but this is my top guy. I call him Panda Express. So I looked at my wife, and she looked at me, and we said, we're not interested. We walked away because I felt like that was extremely racist. I told you last week or 2 weeks ago, because I was away last week, that I had Some man, where did I put it? I had the paper with the questions I was asked on my review, and also the information on the suspected racist that tried to hit me in the nuts that time with his cane. So the questions that were asked on my self-assessment, goals, operations staff, that's what they called it. The self-assessment is what accomplishment was the most important to you this year? Why? What skills or knowledge did you gain this year? What challenge did you face this year? How did you overcome it or work through it? What are the next steps in your career? What ideas do you have to take your performance to the next level? What barriers or obstacles prevent you from performing at your best? How might the firm help you remove those barriers? Sounds sort of like your clip from the beginning. And that was how, pretty much how they went about it. And you kind of got a grade between the average of 1 to 5. And I thought that was interesting. So, it was difficult when I got it, trying to answer these questions, because it's like, I don't know what goals I have. I don't know what's the next step in my career. It's not like it's laid out for me. It's like pretty much I'm in a position. I'm not an accountant, So the gentleman that I said he worked. Now this is a fat, crippled, white man, very out of shape, roly poly, and this is the gentleman who I said tried to zipper me up and think like he was going to hit me with the cane. But he's the co-founder and the president of the International Counterterrorism Officers Association Incorporated. And this is the people that pay for the United States officers to go to Israel to be trained in how to deal with people that they classify as black. And I'll mute my line. Thank you, Gus.
Wow. That's, workplace racism. Anytime you get those forms for an assessment, a review, if it's a promotion, anything like that, I think those forms are important. The questions that they ask, now that, as you were saying, it just seems so not applicable to your job. I was just thinking of, what you've told us about your experience every day, and like, man, I'm just trying to get people to stop harassing me as I'm getting the fruit and not getting caught in between racists who are battling about where files are going to be transported in the office. I mean, it just doesn't seem applicable to your position and what you've been telling us about. But anyway, workplace racism. I'm pausing from getting other callers' comments, questions, just because we did have multiple people who did write in this week. We had...
Oh, one more thing, Gus, and this is real quick.
Y'all interrupting today. Like,
I'm
man.
sorry, Gus.
Go ahead.
I'm so sorry. No, I'm saying I'm still being called Shaq. I've been unsuccessful in getting this man to stop calling me Shaq. And it's trickled over to a white female now calling me Shaq as well. And I've expressed to both of them how much I dislike it. And, they have continued to call. They think they take it as a joke. He says, call me Spud. That's what he tells me. But I apologize for cutting you off. I just got a chance to read my notes because I don't have my headphones. I'm on the speakerphone, so I apologize.
Right on. They will do that too. I've experienced, I've witnessed that where they will engage in terroristic, racist behavior, calling you Shaq or whatever, calling any of the nicknames and such, calling you these names where you've made it clear, I do not, wish to be called this. And then they'll say, oh, well, you can just call me, Spud or whatever the other little, do not engage in that at all, beforehand or after. They start calling you names. Don't return it tit for tat and start calling them names, and don't engage in that behavior from the beginning. Just call everybody. In fact, I am a big sir, ma'am, all of that, and be known, be in a habit of speaking to people in that manner. But yeah, that I think Red, we've had enough people who've had suggestions on the name thing where you can not answer sometimes. I think these might be whites who might be doing it specifically because, oh, we see that the Negro doesn't like to be called Shaq. Let's see if we can get everybody in the office to call him Shaq, since it started with one person and then it's spreading. That's classic racist behavior. They love that sort of thing. We did have several people who wrote in. I wanted to try to make sure that I got to the folks who wrote in as well. This one especially, 10 years of the cows. That was what I was thinking most importantly or primarily as I got this one. So she wrote in, I've been listening to Neutralizing Workplace Racism and the compensatory call-in for about a couple of years now, and I really admire the work that you're doing as far as clarifying what racism truly is and teaching the victims of racism how to minimize the stresses that will undoubtedly be suffered as a result of it. I seriously believe that your work needs to be made into a course for study at colleges and universities like the Harvard Business Review. And even some majority black high school, as the earlier in life that one becomes less confused, the better off they tend to be able to navigate this system. My reason for this email is due to an issue that I feel has not in capital letters, been clarified on Neutralizing Workplace Racism, and that issue is how to deal with workplace discrimination. I don't tend to use the word discrimination, but that's what is written. When the discrimination and harassment is coming from a non-white person. I know that you encourage your listeners to view other non-white people as victims of racism, but I haven't, as of yet, heard you give any concrete solutions on how to deal with these people. I know that you don't advocate for responding to them in the same manner as we would a white person, but what should be done? Do we just ignore them? And how can we ignore or be empathetic towards a person whose actions have the same effect on them as the actions of a white supremacist? Now, I will pause there. That statement, I do not think that that is accurate. It certainly cannot be accurate in most instances. Particularly, I'm reading this. We just had last week a non-white person write in for workplace racism. This was her exact issue, talking about a black person, and I believe there's a cowbell here, who's married to a white person and is nasty and rude, mistreats the other non-white people on the job. And I read her email, and the most important sentence in my view in her email was that this black person has no power. That was her sentence. In my view, that is the case as long as there's a system of white supremacy, as long as you have any non-white person, regardless of what they're doing on the job. The only power that they have is what whites allowed them to do. That means that the white person really has the power. So it can't be that that non-white person, whatever they're doing, has the same impact as a racist. That, just according to counter-racist logic, in my view, that cannot be the case. Continuing, I've heard of many racial discrimination harassment lawsuits where some of the offenders named in the suit were non-white people. Even a couple where an attempt was made to invalidate the claim because the offenders were classified as Asian, Latino, or Hispanic. A black male who worked for Boeing in El Segundo, California, recently won his racial discrimination lawsuit against the company and stated in his claim that an Asian male was one of the people who harassed him by making monkey references about him. Maybe you have addressed the issue by giving your solution as to how to deal with these people, but I must admit that I may have missed it due to selective hearing. She has selective in all caps as well. Although I do recognize other non-white people as being victims, I do not feel that they should be treated different from anyone else who attempts to victimize me. Again, I appreciate what you're doing, and apologies if you have given precise instruction on this subject matter and I have just not absorbed the information. This is one that we have, all capital letters, talked about all the time. In fact, going all the way back, as I said, 2013, there was a time we could not get through workplace racism and even address problems that white people were causing on the job because everybody called in to complain about other black people that they didn't like on the job. This was so intense for a while. It almost had to be a rule that we are not going to just sit around and complain about other black people on the job for workplace racism, because that would happen week after week after week after week. Specifically with 2018 and this issue, We had a female caller who dialed in where a black person on the job, I had physically assaulted her, and she called the enforcement officials, and I strongly encouraged that and said the same thing to anybody else. If you're in a situation, once it gets physical, and if you feel that you are not safe, I don't care who it is, enforcement officials. I think I've taken the same stance, and we've talked about it this year, 2018. If it's any sort of unwanted touching, sexual harassment, it should be pretty much the same code. I don't care who it is. And I think we have had some non-white people who have said that they would have a slightly different code depending on the circumstance, who it is, what the conditions are, where they might be slightly more patient with a non-white person in talking to them or trying to see if they could get that resolved without escalating, but they would not have the same patience for another non-white person. We talked about that specifically. I'm trying to think. We've talked about where if it's a non-white person on the job, and if they're like a supervisor type position, and they're being discourteous, verbally so, we've talked about that. Specific suggestions to that being you can do email, where you ask them, questions. Is there a specific reason why you're using this tone or talking to me in this manner? People generally will be much more reserved in their email commentary. Now you've got an electronic record as well. And this is one where I really encourage specifics, because I have seen a lot of times where it can be a very general thing of just general agitation and frustration with non-white people in the workplace, and that is totally valid. Non-white people like myself, Gus T, we can be very frustrating. We're victims of racism in a weak position. But if we're talking the workplace, I always think it's best if this is the specific problem that's happening, and this is specifically, what I'm trying to do to neutralize that, as opposed to just general frustration with non-white people in the workplace who are not codified or functioning in a manner that is not pleasing to me. I've heard a lot of that over the years, and that I do generally say, ignore exactly what we heard on the program today when that came up. Ignore. If it's not direct mistreatment of you, ignore as much as you possibly can, because it's probably not a whole lot that's going to be said verbally to change if somebody is just talking or saying things that you do not find appealing. Are there any folks, listeners, who would like to share, sharing their code? I feel like I'm repeating myself. Share their code in terms of if it is a non-white person who is mistreating you, if you have specific instances of how you have dealt with where a non-white person has mistreated you on the job and how you dealt with that, or if you have a general code of how you deal with other non-white people mistreating you on the job, because I feel like this is something we talk about all the time on the program. Any folks have a code that they would like to share?
Can I be heard?
Retired firefighter.
I'll first go by the probably the most classic strategy: no contact, no conflict with that non-white person. And I've used that. I have used that in a lot of circumstances, and in turn, I may, if I measure the time is correct, I may go to that person later on. I have done it anyway, to that non-white person, and basically we would talk about exchange views on that particular situation. The time that I did that, it mended the conflict. But the first thing that I would do would be to get away from that non-white person and have no contact with that person until in my case, until I see where there may be a time to whereas you could have some sort of a discussion. Then it's perceivable that it may never be a time for discussion. So be it. If there's no time to ever have another discussion with that person, but no contact, no conflict.
Right on. Anyone have a code if it's a situation where you have to have contact, a situation where it's going to be unavoidable, and or where it's a black supervisor, black manager that you're dealing with. So not only you're going to be required to have contact, but this person actually has some, supervision over you, so they say.
Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. I had an incident when I was working, and I ended up getting fired from my job for it because I was physically assaulted by one of the I guess you would call the patrons that would have to come in to use our facilities. But hindsight, what I would do differently is I wouldn't be so quick to try to enforce the rules, because I was, in charge of telling, the patrons what they could and couldn't do. I wouldn't be so overzealous, being less confused due to listening to this program, knowing what I know now. I wouldn't be so, well, you can't do this and can't do that. But I would definitely do what I did by calling the cops because I was physically assaulted. That would be my code. But I mean, like I said, if I had to do something different, I just wouldn't be so if I saw one of another victim doing something, I think I would be a little bit more patient and a little bit more less overzealous about explaining to them what they can do as far as the rules are concerned. And because I see that they was using that. It was just basically like a setup, you know what I mean? I would tell them what they could do and can't do, and that's how the whole incident ended up starting, because I was just basically telling them what the policies was, and even though they didn't have the policies set out in front of the patrons where they could see what they could and couldn't do, and because I was trying to enforce to explain to them what the policies was, it ended up being a physical altercation as a result of it. And I was physically assaulted. I ended up calling the police. And by me basically protecting myself, I ended up getting fired from the job. So it was just a setup anyway. So, I'm enforcing the rules, but then I end up still getting fired from the position because I'm just protecting myself. So, and in the rules and the policies and procedures, I wasn't supposed to protect myself. So I would definitely just not, allow myself to be used or used in that manner again. And I'm getting along.
Much obliged, Draftomania. Any other folks have a code for how you deal with, how you function around other non-white people on the job, especially if it's a situation where you're going to have some level of contact with this non-white person, and or this non-white person is in a supervisory position. Any other folks have a code in terms of how they function, how they relate to these individuals? I'll assume. Oops.
Yes.
Stacy in the UK. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily. Well, in the first instance, just in terms of, I guess, managing that situation, I would just say, I think as retired firefighter said, minimise contact. Like, I think it was just Draftomania who spoke. Obviously, I've been in a similar position where non-white person physically assaulted me, and another person who was managing a little race soldier who made up a false accusation against me. I tried to minimise contact with her as the non-white manager, conflict with her as the non-white manager, dealing with a situation that was presented to her. She ended up becoming part of the problem. But essentially, my aim and my approach all the way through the initial phases, at least, was to make sure that she was clear that she wasn't the person who, or I understood her position as the manager, and that, I didn't have any particular concern, and she got used against me by racists. And so pretty much like the example that I think the person gave, you end up going through a formal process of grievance, and you have to, and unfortunately times name the non-white people in, because they're part of a situation. It's out of your control to a degree. However, at no point, and this goes back to the feedback that I gave last week about the non-white union rep who is also being used to undermine me, whether or not, I'm frustrated or even have to go through some kind of formal process with a non-white person because they are mistreating me, the fact is, do not take your eyes off the problem. And the problem is the racists who are controlling those actions of those individuals or manipulating their situation. So, yes, in terms of my grievance, I did have to name some non-white people, but I certainly made sure I named all the racist white suspects in that process as well, and held them thoroughly accountable for their actions. And yeah, I think it's just about minimizing contact in the end. And I guess the other way to see it as well, and this is the last thing I'll say, is that where you've got a supervisor who is non-white and who is treating you in a way which you believe to be mistreatment, treat that non-white person like they are a white person. And I'll mute my line there, Gus.
Context of white supremacy. We should be opposed to any and all forms of mistreatment. Doesn't matter who's doing the mistreating, if it is a white person or a non-white person. All victims of white supremacy should be staunchly against mistreatment from anyone. So, hey, if you're being mistreated by a non-white person on the job, that should be stopped. Same as if, a race soldier was mistreating you on the job. And there are folks who said, hey, I have the same, my conduct does not change. I function the same way on a job, whether I'm working on a job with all whites, all non-whites. My conduct does not change. I don't do lunch dates with anybody and all that. There are some folks who do that, who listen to the cows. That's what works for you. Other folks, they have slightly different modifications if they're with non-whites and maybe a little more patience and things that they would do if it was not a race soldier. But, you have to figure out what's going to be work best for you. Again, if it's issues with non-white coworkers, specifics, I think that's always helpful to focus on specifics and specifically how are they mistreating you. And that's what we're trying to get stopped, as opposed to I'm just frustrated with, another confused victim who's not necessarily doing anything against me. Other folks have commentary, their own situation or suggestions that they wanted to share. Lines should be open. Proceed.
Can I be heard?
Mr. Steele?
Yes. This is Ken Steele, and I'm in just outside of Irvine, where I can witness the fire that is, I guess, on the news. It's very interesting to see. But I wanted to comment earlier. The caller from the UK mentioned that I wasn't, they wasn't sure my comment was on topic. I was just talking about a situation whereby suspected racist, white supremacist, that I opened myself up to even going as far as, going to their house and everything like that. It didn't necessarily harm me in the workplace, but I definitely was made aware of, their a very blatant display of their views, and yeah, that person helped me, but it wasn't that help didn't come without being exposed to acts of racism. That's what I was, talking about with my earlier comment. But yeah, I recently was booked for a show. I do comedy at night on occasion, and I was recently booked for a show at a bar in West Hollywood, and the bar had an Irish name. So I thought it was just an Irish bar, and I got there, and it was actually a gay bar. And I was there, and I remember we got a very interesting speech beforehand about how we are here to, promote fun and keep the hate out. And the whole time they're looking at me, and, everybody else seems like they're not getting looked at, but I feel like I'm getting looked at during the speech. And so after the speech, I noticed the acts, and, it kind of felt like I was at what they call a clean comedy show, but it wasn't that I was at a clean comedy. There was one act that specifically had a number of black rapist jokes, and there were, a bunch of Bill Cosby and R. Kelly jokes, and, and they even had a whole bit where they dressed up as Elvis and sang about R. Kelly and Bill Cosby, and, just talking about all the black people that have been accused of, sexual misconduct. And so I didn't know exactly, what kind of, I couldn't really read what was going on. I thought this was like a regular comedy stage where I could, just go in. And I went up, and I guess I did a bit about how this was the first time that I had, been to a gay bar since college, and I was just noting the differences between the gay bar and the regular bar, and they got really offended at the fact that I called regular bars, and I could tell that they were, getting a little agitated by my set, and in the middle of my set, they just cut off my mic, and my joke was basically that at the gay bar, at the regular bar, when guys bumped into each other, the first response is, either "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to," or "Let's fight." And at the gay bar, they just ride into all the bumps, and they were really bothered by all of my gay bar jokes that I told at a gay bar, and they took me off the stage. Now, I noted to the booker, I said, I've been to plenty of shows where, it'll be a white comic at a black establishment, and then they tell a whole bunch of, "Oh my gosh, I'm at a black establishment" jokes, and, they'll tell, jokes about black people, and black people will laugh, and it's okay. And I was telling some jokes about, being at a gay bar, and I guess that's not okay, but I guess it is okay to talk about how black people are rapists, and how, Bill Cosby and R. Kelly are rapists, and sing songs about that, but we can't talk about, just the subtle differences between regular bars and gay bars. Anyway, another bit of racism that I ran into this week was that I recently started, I got into the car trade. One of my friends, he talked me into it, whatever. So I was at the auction, and my friend, prior to this auction, gave me a long speech about how there ain't no racism and this, that, and the other, and, he's not the most codified, or he was being very upset with me. And I remember we got split up at the auction, and I left early, and he remained there, and we made our purchase, and there ended up being a ton of fees, and I guess as I'm, paying all the fees and everything like that, he was looking at, some very expensive cars, and I guess he was then surrounded by security, and there was a big to-do about, what are you looking at me for, and this, that, and the other. And basically, in that whole exchange, he was reminded very starkly about his position as a black person, particularly as a dark-skinned black person with dreads. And, so he got the treatment, and afterwards he came to me talking about it, and then he said, "Dog, I think there's something with this racism and everything." And I thought that gave me a hearty laugh. And but that was some racism that was experienced at the workplace, even in an entrepreneurial endeavor. I just anybody who thinks about going into cars at all, don't. It is the people are unscrupulous. The racism is very apparent. I've been in Southern California for 2 years, and in that whole time, I've not had my phone stolen. In fact, I haven't had my phone stolen in prior to that, 5 years prior to that. And sure enough, I was at a car auction recently, and yeah, my phone went missing, and it turned up at a Latino Cellular in Redlands, California, PCS, Metro PCS authorized retailer. So that was where it was last turned on and last turned off, and the police in Redlands are of no help. So thank you so much. I appreciate it, and I'll go ahead and mute my line.
Context of White Supremacy. Mr. Steele out giving his homophobic brand of humor at the gay bar. Wow. Context of White Supremacy, indeed. I am not surprised that they would have a litany of black rapist jokes. That no good Bill Cosby, no good R. Kelly, Morgan Freeman probably threw him in there as well. Any folks that we have missed completely, if you have not shared, if you have either suggestions that you'd like to share, or if you have a problem, line should be open. If we missed you completely, proceed.
Hello, may I speak?
Yes, ma'am. Greetings, Irie.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Gus. Just listening to the caller before me, I wanted to share similar workplace racism via entertainment. About 2 months ago, I had a set at a bar, and it's in the Chicagoland area. I came up, and I was practicing with a friend, gave them the set list, and the first song on the set list was Plantation to the Penitentiary by Wynton Marsalis. And if anybody's familiar with those lyrics, they're not very stark, but they are poignant and to the point, very concise. And my friend, who is non-white, black, said, "Are you sure you want to do this song? It might run us out of the bar." And I said, yes, because really I'm doing it more so for the other non-white people in the audience than I am for anyone else. As a reminder of what our situation is, just bring a level of consciousness. So the night of the show, we went in, got set up, and I was the second person in the show, the second act, and it was the first song that I did, and everybody white except for the bartender immediately vacated. They went out and smoked, and it wasn't anything as bad as people making jokes or anything about disparaging jokes about black people, but they definitely were not there to be reminded of our country's past and present. So there's that. And the other workplace racism story I have, which I could possibly, I don't know, maybe I could use some advice, or maybe I should just keep in mind to be quiet or something next time. Like I shared before, I do ride sharing, and one night about 4 people got in the vehicle. It was 3 white individuals and 1 non-white person who said he was actually a Nigerian transplant, I guess you could say, or he was moved over here as a child, and he was in the front seat with me. he sat in the front seat with me, and I said, "Oh, that's cool. You know, you're from Nigeria. Do you go back off?" And he was like, "A little bit." And so I asked him if he spoke any of the dialects. He's like, "Oh, hell no." And I kind of got shook up, like I was trying to hide it, but I got shook up. I was like, "What? Like, what do you mean, hell no?" And he's like, "I don't want nothing to do with that place. The place is shit. I'm sorry. Excuse me. That place is crap. Just a bunch of stuff." And I was like, "Do you know what's going on geopolitically there for you to be saying this stuff?" He's like, "No, and I'm really not interested." And I was not codified. I fell apart. And I was like, you probably should know at least what's going on in your home country, because if you don't, somebody else is definitely making it their business to know and arrange it their way. I felt I was a little embarrassed about it and a little bit shaken up by how forward he was in front of these white people on denying his African lineage and origination. Well, that's it. I will mute my line. I apologize, Gus, for the slippage.
Not a problem. Much obliged, Irie. With the ride sharing, I would just say be safe. We've had other victims talk about that as well, and there are a lot of reports of race soldiers carrying their terrorism to the vehicle. So be safe when you're out and about. With that situation, if it's a work capacity, I think as we were saying before, like I probably minimize contact. If it's a non-white person, I probably if I'm in a work capacity, I'm probably not going to try to engage a non-white person, even if I think they're confused and I want to offer a suggestion. I'm probably not going to do that too often, especially not if they're whites present. But even if it just been myself and this other individual, probably not in a work context. I've just seen more often than not, I've seen where that sort of situation works out where it is not favorable for the non-white person who is offering the suggestion. So yeah, I'm a big advocate of, just not bringing up racism. I think I've said that for years, not talking about racism on the job, even with other black people. Big advocate of that, and just listening, maybe asking questions. That I think, and I think you even were thinking about, how could you better handle the situation next time around? Are there other folks that we have missed completely? Any other folks have comments or their own situation or suggestions that they would like to offer?
Can I be heard?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi. May I make a statement and then share my workplace racism?
Let's hear it.
Okay. Dirt/dirty is in the code book on page 92.
Thank you. Let's hear what it says, please.
All right. Avoid using these terms unless you're using them to apply to actual dirt. As on the surface of the earth, do not use expressions like dirty book or dirty look or dirty talk, etc. Do not say that something gave you a dirty deal or someone gave you a dirty deal. Reason: the words dirt or dirty have been used by the white supremacist races to often mean the same as dark and evil, dark and filthy, or dark and unworthy. White supremacist races have often used the word dirt or dirty in such a manner or as to associate dirt, dirty, dark, filth, and evil with black, brown, red, yellow, or any non-white people. Thus, according to many white supremacist races, the word dirty, dark, and evil all mean the same, particularly when applied to non-white people. Note: it is important to study the ways that people use the words dirt or dirty. When someone uses the terms like dirt, dirty words, dirty talk, etc., ask him or her if he or she, mean incorrect words or incorrect talk. Ask him or her why he or she uses the word dirty in that manner.
ProduceJustice.com, Neely Fuller Jr. Get your word guide or your code book. Thank you so much for getting your code book. I'm still hurting, flood victim, 8 months in. You said you had you read that for us. We are much appreciative. You said you had your own commentary you wanted to share as well.
Yes, I took off work today. I didn't go. That's why I'm still on the line. I work at Amazon. I noticed that I'm in the warehouse because I guess that's where they start you. I don't know. Everyone there is unhappy. Just like it's a very depressing environment, but they need a place to work. I noticed dealing with the white people, a lot of them are either lesbian or what are those things? Gay. And the lesbian ladies are insanely assertive, I noticed. They're very assertive and direct, and they expect you as black people to take them in regardless because, hey, I'm a lesbian, I have a problem, or I'm a minority, considered a minority, whatever that is, and you're forced to deal with me or I'll get you fired. So at work, they tend to be very aggressive. They're very quick and stern and very rapid to tell you what you're doing wrong. And if you say anything against them, they'll turn you into human resource. I had a gentleman, black male, venting to me about just venting in general. He's not codified, but he's venting in general about how he's treated at work. And he laughed at a gay male, white Spanish-speaking male, and the Spanish-speaking male got offended because he must have ran into a wall and all that stuff. And he got mad at the black male that was laughing, and went to human resource. He's, I'll beat you up, I'll do this stuff. This is the so-called gay Spanish-speaking white male. So the black guy was like, I get off at the same time as you. So when they get off, the black male didn't know that the other male went to human resources on him. So with that, human resources pulled him in and contacted him, talked to him about it, and they basically believed the other male over him. He put in a transfer to another location, same company, and last week, or this week, maybe Monday, it was denied. So he's fussing and venting out loud. So I just stated to him, just calm down. Just venting aloud isn't going to assist you the way you're just walking around yelling and venting. Find you another job. As long as you're here, stay here. And then keep in mind the reason why they didn't transfer you could be the incident that you just had with this male. And then he said, I never thought of that. I think you're right. I'm going to just look for another job and just deal with this until that happens and not overexert myself, because they have us like picking in 7 seconds, 5 to 7 seconds. I'm supposed to locate what's in your wish list in this cubby, a kindergarten cubby, and place it in a bucket and have it submitted in 5 to 7 seconds. That's what I'm supposed to do at work. That's in picking it. Pulling it, placing it inside, there's a lot there. There's a time limit also. Placing it in a box to send it off, there's also a certain amount of time, seconds, that you have to do this task. And if you don't do this, you get a write-up. If something is mislabeled and they decide that they found it, you get a write-up. If you make a mistake, you have to pick 2,000 more products to cover one mistake in a week, or you'll get a write-up. Of course, I'm on my final one. So, But the way I deal with things a little different because I'm not only am I a Prime member, but I'm a customer. So you're welcome to fire me or whatever you think you could do, but I'll take it. I have enough time to take it however I take.
Caller in the Bay Area, are you still with us? She might have been disconnected. I'm not sure. Caller in the Bay Area, are you still with us? They might have heard her and deemed her being uppity on the line and disconnected. I'll see. Hopefully she'll ring us back and we can get the rest of her commentary. But that's something to be mindful of. If you notice that you're in a work environment and everybody there seems that they are just miserable and disgusted with the work, and particularly when you're in environments, I think Red in Nevada before had talked about they were on a job where I think you could get, let's say you could accrue 10 sick days for the year, but if you took 8 sick days, that's grounds for termination. Like they would almost kind of do things to set you up to be sabotaged. That seems like the type of situation if it's you're asked to do a lot of very difficult or cumbersome tasks in a very short amount of time, and then if you make errors, they're going to be really intense punishments. That sort of environment where it's just going to be grueling, unpleasant labor where you're not compensated correctly. Be mindful of that. This is not a place where you want to stay for a long period of time. Not that you're going to find nirvana on the plantation, but I mean, certainly there are some spots on the plantation that are substantially more toxic than others. Stacy in the UK, did you have commentary? 3:13 a.m. Friday morning.
Yeah, thank you again, Gus. Your point there actually about paying attention to your environment, I think that is really important. And I do remember being interviewed for a job, and on the basis of the job that I had at the time, it was just a noisy environment. When I went to the interview, and I remember walking through the office, I was really impressed by the fact that everybody was so quiet. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is a really focused place to work. It actually turned out that it was just a really oppressive place to work. And I had resigned from there within 2 months. So I think there is something to actually paying attention and really thinking about your environment and what the vibes are actually being given, even in, even on at an interview stage. I'll just give a couple of updates, and I'm going to try and be quick. And firstly, apologies to Mr. Steele if it sounded like I was critiquing him. I give myself the excuse that it is the early hours of the morning, so I probably, I often kind of miss some of the detail on what people are saying, and I listening back to the archives, and then I'm a lot clearer on what people are saying, but definitely never is the intention to sound like I'm critiquing any other victim. As we often say on the program, paying attention to words, I try and stay away from anything to do with the blessed BAME network, Black and Minority Ethnic Network, that has been established in the organisation where I work. However, today I was off code and did read something on the system, but it was actually because I saw an update. And when I did read it, there was not a lot that seemed to be an update. And I mentioned last week that a non-white person did approach me to talk about racism. And I did feel quite unsettled about my response to that and being off code. And even her behaviour, and I think it was because I didn't expect her, I don't have many conversations with her because she's not in my team, but I didn't expect her to take the approach that she did, which was to be firing direct questions at me about racism. And I took it that she was just trying to pry into my situation, but actually it might have been a bit more than that in terms of being sent out to test people's views, i.e. non-white members of staff's views on all of the diversity initiatives in the organisation. I could be wrong, I could just be being slightly paranoid, but there was an update on the system on the intranet for the BAME BAME network, and it was a blog that was written by the director of HR, and there didn't seem to be much of an update in the update blog, which makes me think it seemed to be reiterating that the BAME network is going to be and everything they're doing around diversity is aimed at addressing the BAME pay gap. And I just related it to the question that I posed to the person last week around the benefits of the Black History Month celebrations to addressing the BAME pay gap. So that's why I thought this is a bit of a coincidence, but it could be that I'm just being, as I said, slightly paranoid. Anyway, one thing that I did observe in the blog was a reference to earlier work that had been done to get the views of non-white staff and perhaps even wider staff who would have responded to the blog, i.e. white and people who classify themselves as white, the response to the BAME pay gap and other diversity problems in the organisation. And there was a line in there which said that they had sought the combined views from the union, the lean-in circles, and the BAME network. And I thought, what does that mean, combined words or combined views? If you're seeking views, you're just seeking views, and you've consulted with each of those particular networks or groups within the organisation. It didn't make any sense to me. And then I gave it some thought. Now, there is a non-white female who has a white parent who is the chair of the union, who is also the person who organises all of the lean-in circles, and who I believe has had some involvement, if probably is a member of the BAME network, and certainly attended a round table with on the BAME issues or the issues faced by black staff last year, June. Now, this is an extremely confused individual, and she is a victim, and I only point it out because I believe that this is the way in which racists are very skillful at identifying victims and using them for their agenda. And she recently wrote a blog, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I just picked up a few sentences from her blog. And she talks about the fact that she's a person with who's of mixed heritage, so white and black parent, and she was adopted by a white family. And she says that she can see the world as a white person and a black person. She was raised in a largely white, middle-class, socially conservative family, and I know and appreciate the way they think. She was born in Ireland, which was mainly white at that time, and there was nothing wrong with that because it's just the way it was. She has been called a reverse racist because she decided not to date a particular white guy. But when she did eventually meet or date and marry her now husband, she got grief over their mixed race relationship, mostly from black people who consider her a race traitor. And my kids are mixed race, and that is African, Caribbean and Irish, but effectively they're white. And she often gets challenged by the diversity questions on the various forms because she's forced to tick other, which is a constant reminder of her otherness. Again, she is a victim. I read that because there is an awful lot of what I believe is confusion in there. And that is the person who I believe they've selected to provide her combined views on the issues that are faced by non-white staff in the organisation. And when we did have the roundtable last year, she was the one person around the table who said that, you know, she sees the world, that she understands the views of both white and black people, and that how her white colleagues also struggle with progression and opportunities for progression within the organisation. I blame the suspected racist for this agenda, not the victim. And in terms of my weekly progress, as you pointed out last week, I am ranking myself. My weekly progress mark is at 80%. However, in listening back to the program, I've refined my my grading system. So, and that's off the basis of listening to some of the callers, actually. So, for observation and conciseness, I think I'm at bronze, maybe even less than that. But I mark myself as on the level with I'm aiming to be at the standard of the caller from the Florida courthouse, because his observation skills are amazing, and he is, he can relay several incidents in a really concise way. So I'm working towards his gold standard. I think I'm currently at bronze. In terms of courteousness, I believe I'm probably a bronze and silver, and Gus, you are my gold standard. However, in relation to the little race soldier who lied about me and accused me of shouting at him, it's probably aluminium. And then on codification, my gold standard is the software developer, and I think I'm currently at a bronze. But as I said, in terms of my weekly progress, I think I'm at 80% this week, so I'm quite pleased with my progress. I'm in my line there, Gus.
Be your own toughest critic. Encouraged that before. Great breakdown of her, I guess, a self-evaluation system. I've said that before as well, as opposed to when we, get really excited sometimes about criticizing another non-white person, the non-white person whose faults you are most familiar with would be your own. You really are in a mood to do some criticizing. Start at home. Anyhow, and race soldiers, so shrewd to select another confused victim of white supremacy, and then the cowbell as well. She can see both sides, including she can pick out those dirty non-white racists as well, who can be just as much of a problem as white racists. Confusion is lethal. Other folks we missed completely. Anybody? Actually, our caller in the Bay Area, I think, returned. Caller in the Bay Area, we lost you. Did you want to chime back in? You were telling us about the situation at the warehouse in Amazon. The black male, I guess he got in trouble specifically, and then I think we lost you somewhere in there.
Yes, thank you. It drops every 2 hours when I call you. I thought it was you getting tired of me spectating, but I guess it's not the case. The environment is very racist, and it's uncomfortable. You can tell in everyone's face. He's just venting aloud because I guess he thinks someone they're listening, but they're only listening to use it against him. And the way they have us, the way they treat us, I just say us because I work there, it's just that it's just doesn't. I don't know if it's because it's a warehouse environment or because they don't care, but from what I get from the life expectancy working there, because of all the stress and the pressure of what you're going to do, how you switch from, oh, no, you're not going to do what you originally did last week, which was his case. You're going to do this, or you're going to do this, or they'll take you off of what you were doing and force you to do something else that you didn't want to do or weren't doing, kind of like an instant demotation, and then you do what I say when I say. It deems to be uncomfortable, and that's how he's responding. So he's a bit better now because I talk to him in a particular way because we participate in the program also, so that helps. And he looks at it in a different manner, and he's not so vocal with walking around complaining about how he's treated. And that's all, and thank you so much.
Grant, I was definitely not booed. I do not boot people for being spectators, although I do give mild verbal admonishment. Counter-racism does not need more spectators, but I do not boot people off the line, so that is not Gus. But that is fantastic. Black self-respect, just trying to help another victim on the job. I certainly am not an advocate of venting on the job. I mean, being mindful of words. Wow, you do not want to be in a situation where you're just out in the hall or wherever in the workplace, out in public space on the job, ranting or griping, yelling, speaking loudly about problems that you're encountering on the job, or if you feel that you're being mistreated. I mean, if it gets to that point, you should definitely take a mental health break. I mean, talk about hypertension and bad, and it's just going to make things where it's not going to solve any problems, and it might create new problems, because if it's got to that point, you're probably not being very precise with what you're saying. And exactly as the Bay Area mom, as she told us, whites will probably use that sort of thing against you. I don't think, contrary to what we heard from the Harvard Business Review, I don't think that they're going to hear that and say, oh my goodness, can you hear what's happening to him? What can we do to help you out, man? I'm so sorry. I do not think that that's what's going to be the case. I think they're probably going to wait, might be recording you, might see if you say something, and then call you in and, oh yeah, your behavior, some of the things that you said, man. I mean, wow, that just really had us frightening, and your conduct on the whole, just seemed very aggressive. Didn't feel like you were a part of our team, man. Like, I could easily see that sort of thing happening on the job. So I do not encourage ranting, and again, black self-respect for trying to reach out to this person and getting them to, I guess, codify their behavior a bit, try to make some improvements to how they're functioning on the job. Outstanding. Other folks, anybody that we've missed totally, if you have a hand up and we've not heard from you at all, if you have commentary, proceed.
May I be heard? He didn't speak at all. He didn't hear it. I'm going to mute my line. He didn't speak at all.
Oh, no, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Well, greetings, everyone, again. Excuse me. For the Shaq comment, Thomas in New York, I'm sorry that you're having to deal with that. I mean, you share with us that you're very tall, which I think is, awesome. But, the racists, the petty terrorist Klan members, they always want to try to find anything and turn it into a negative. So I hope that you can, I wonder, have you tried just not answering them at all? And if that, is an option, and if it's something that you would consider. Just Ken Steele and anyone else on the line, absolutely VGQ, but I just wanted to point this out that if you would consider not using the term dreads, but say locks instead, because dreads is a racist term made up by the Klan members to insult black people's hairstyles and say that our locks are dreadful. That's what dreads means. Also, for the term dirty, I know one part of it, one word for that is like the dirty South, and they're talking about where black people live. Interesting thing is, where the Klan members live, that's where the dirty South is, where a bunch of the whites are, because they're terrorists. We're not dirty. Also, I wanted to say for what I mentioned earlier about the white identification in terms of sharing with whites our personal information, and how they're just, I think, trying to get us to to identify with them so that we can share our personal information. I wanted to quickly say that, I've shared on this broadcast that I hate whites. I don't hate them anymore. Because what I recently did is, of course, I don't have any white friends anymore, but I did have white Facebook friends still. And recently I deleted them. And that was actually very difficult, even for some whites who had helped me, I guess you could say, in the past. And it was tough breaking away from them. And what I think I learned from that is that the reason why is because of white identification. And I think that the reason I hated them is because I identified with them. And I don't think you can hate people that you don't identify with. And so now that I don't have any sort of connection with them in any way, shape, or form, I don't feel that way anymore. And the last thing that I wanted to say was that as far as me saying that the person on the Harvard review, that she was probably deceived and misled into doing that. And also how many people have said how white people, they, get other victims to mistreat other victims, on their behalf. It reminds me, and I want to say that I thank you to Stacey. I really appreciate her commentary tonight, just keeping the focus where it should be, that the problem is white people. And the codified software developer, she said something recently, I don't remember her exact statement, but it was something along the lines of, I understand that victims, that they're just trying to survive in a terroristic system or something like that. It was like the best comment I ever heard, and I can't even remember exactly the wording, but I was so grateful for that. And just shout out to Non-Mighty Wick. Gus knows who I'm talking about. And what I want to say about that is that in terms of getting other victims to mistreat other victims, and even the lady who might have been misled into that study that she did, is that, as Non-Mighty Wick used to say, that's what domination looks like. And I'll mute my line. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Gus, and thanks to the man who let me go first. I'll mute my line.
Oh, yeah. 10 years of the cows. 10 years of the cows. Caller in Florida, thank you for yielding to Ivy. Did you want to proceed?
Yes, sir. Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Thank you very much, sir. Greetings to Gus, the host, the listeners and callers. I had mentioned a couple of months ago about downloading the county's diversity and inclusion plan PDF document. I never really got to read over it, but I just wanted to share different pieces of it in the next couple of weeks. The first, I wanted to read off one of the definitions they got. They have about 5 definitions. Well, no, about 4 definitions for diversity and 1 definition for inclusion. One of the definitions is, it says individual differences, and then in parentheses it says, e.g., personality, learning styles, and life experiences, and group/social differences. And then it goes into another set of parentheses saying race/ethnicity, class, gender, and sexual orientation, country of origin, and ability, as well as cultural, political, religious, or other affiliations. Then it has in bold, at its ideal, diversity is the range of human differences, recognizing that each person has layers of diversity, which make his or her perspective unique. I wanted to start off with that one because I think that definition was the most confusing, the most conflicting definition out of it. So I think this is part of the plan they may have scheduled to present to us on the job. That was for my first one. For the second was, I heard 2 racist jokes by a white person. She was stating this to another white person, and the 2 jokes were, it was, what do you call a rich China or a rich Chinese person? And she answered by saying cha-ching. And the second racist joke was, what do you call a midget Mexican? And she answered saying, you call it a paragraph because it's too short to be an essay. Number 3 is there was a race soldier who was walking past my desk, and I had a black customer. I was printing out copies, and it was a black grandmother who had her black granddaughter, and he was walking past trying to, I guess, talk to them, and the black female says, "Oh, do you know who that is? That's a police." She said, "That's the police right there," and this is the sheriff that I know of. And he says, "Well, how are you doing, little girl," and stuff like that, trying to speak. And she says, "Well, when you get in trouble, I'm going to send you to him." And then, she just looked very terrified. So he got on his knees. He bent down on his knees, and he was saying, "Oh, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid." And she just looked just terrified once again, very petrified. And he gave her a golden star, a sheriff's office golden star, and she put it on her shirt. So after she left, he came back by there saying, I just can't stand when parents tell their children to be afraid of law enforcement. So I guess they were talking about this trend where they didn't necessarily say black people, but people are telling their children to be afraid, young children to be afraid of law enforcement. And number 4 was this same guy. I noticed he had like this ringtone, and I think the instrument is the harmonica. It's the intro on the Roseanne theme song. If anybody's heard that, like he and it kept going off. Like I heard it at least 2 or 3 times. I'm like, isn't this from the theme of the Roseanne show? And especially she went on that racism lace tirade a couple of months ago. Number 5, the warden, she was in a meeting, and this is the first one that she's done ever since I did the report. So what I found was what was interesting was that she could not stand on the platform that she usually stands on. She passed it on to the clerk and the other administrative white man, because I usually stand in the same spot that I stand in, but she could not face me, so she stepped down the stairs and turned her body and torso to turned it to another side, and was not standing on the platform like she usually did. But mainly she made a statement in response to my supervisor saying that they went to a supervisory seminar, saying that I just wanted to reiterate about the seminar that we all had to go to. And she was the only one that brought it up. So the warden responds by saying, "Yeah, I heard a lot about that. And we had some of our lead workers and supervisors take a day off and go to a supervisor training session." And then she says, and then, maybe they'll use some of the tricks of the trade on you. And she was like smiling when she said it. I'm like, tricks of the trade. Trick has the connotation of deception, I think. And then when you look that term up, and I believe number 6 or whatever, there's 2 terms I had added to my list is sketchy and blend. Sketchy because I heard somebody use the word sketchy. A black guy is looking sketchy, and sketch lines are dark on a sheet of paper. And blend, I heard a victim use that term as to, I guess, fitting in or becoming acknowledged by a white-dominated environment. She said she was trying to blend in, and like that can have a connotation describing color. And the last one is I wanted to give an update on the racial classifications. I reported this on Monday, and I just logged on to a portion of our site, and they took it off. They took the racial classifications off of the part of the site where you search the criminal records, but it's still on the marriage license. and we were going over it. The white supervisor, she was pointing out, yeah, like I noticed they have one that says American Indian and Native American, and I'm wondering, what does this mean with Pacific Islander and Asian American? And one says unknown and not known. She's pointing out pretty much more than what I did. So I said, yeah, can you find some kind of way to get definitions on these? And she was like, yeah, well, I'll try and ask, and I'll screenshot the two of them and see if I can get some answers on them. So I think they've edited one of the sites because I asked her, what does business mean? And it says refused on another one. So she hasn't gotten back to me on it yet. And tomorrow will be Friday. And that's the only thing that I have right now. Thanks for allowing me to speak.
A bevy of activity at the Florida courthouse this week. Racial classifications are extremely important and often a lot of nonsense, according to the courthouse staff themselves, apparently, from the report that we just got. Now, that's ridiculous. This is official state documents, and it's done in such a ridiculous manner that it can't stand up to 5 minutes worth of scrutiny. We have to take it down. That's embarrassing. Or that's the system of racism, white supremacy, and that is the nonsense of those racial classifications. Just asking questions. I think the racist jokes. Why was it? Was it a staff person who was sharing the joke, or was it a patron who was just coming to use the court services?
It was one of the staff members it was in another department because I go around the building, and I overheard a conversation between this white woman and another white woman that was talking. Cha-ching.
Can't be ignorant about racism, white supremacy, making jokes like that. The warden adjusting her posture. I kept thinking Dr. Welsing, she used to say all the time, tell the truth and shame the devil. Can't even look you in the face. This is the warden. All of her antics over months and months and years, I'm sure, of terrorizing at the courthouse and just asking a few questions, and not even on her normal lofty plantation platform. Codification, just follow logic. Sometimes just asking questions can be enough to change a whole lot of people's behavior on your job. Asking questions, using the correct terms, asking questions, staying calm.
Can I be heard?
Retired firefighter in Florida.
Yes, I was going to share my own racist report, workplace racism report. But I'm going to need permission to play you a short Channel 4 news clip. It lasts for 1 minute and 11 seconds. Do I have your permission?
Yes, sir.
Yes, it's involving 3 Miami-Dade County employees. 2 of them are Dade County firefighters that I know. Hold on. Here goes.
About 3 Miami-Dade County employees are under fire for wearing obscene anti-Trump shirts. We've blurred out the shirt because of the offensive language which refer to President Trump and those who voted for him. We've also blurred out the offensive gesture. The men have been identified as Miami-Dade Public Schools employee Brian Chappelle, Miami-Dade Fire and Rescue Captain Faye Davis, and firefighter Ray Williams. One South Florida man is questioning how he, a Trump supporter, would be treated in the case of an emergency.
I think those 3 individuals should be terminated from their positions. I think a message needs to be sent, a message that can reach other states, other jurisdictions on a national level.
Now, in a statement, Miami-Dade Fire and Rescue said while employees have the right to express their personal views, they should not engage in political or religious discussions to the detriment of good discipline and unit morale. And Miami-Dade County Public Schools said, quote, while we respect our employees' right to self-expression, we have a responsibility as a public institution to review this issue and ensure it aligns with our ethical standards, end quote.
you can, if you wanted to post it, you can find that on cbsmiami.com. The local, one of the local channel stations down here in South Florida. Part of it has me thinking, with the reports that's been going nationally with obviously non-white black people being mistreated by law enforcement. You also are seeing situations where the races, the more refined and crafty races are finding means to confuse the narrative by having stories such as this, which is implying to make these non-white victims of racist white supremacy aggressors in quote unquote being racist. But basically, this is the latest incident that's been going on down here in South Florida. As I mentioned, the one employee, I do not know. I think he works for Dade County Public Schools. The other two employees are two individuals, one male, one female, that I know I've worked with and also have been in social environments with. And I'm not totally sure of their status as of now, but I do know that they don't have a Charles Phillips as Mr. Clark and the two other non-white victims had, where the director of the fire department actually put their employment in serious danger on behalf of these non-white people. These two individuals don't have that for sure. And I do not know their status as of yet. The t-shirts that they had said F-U-C-K Trump, which I think is kind of popular, actually, the t-shirt. And the picture, if someone has not seen it, it's a picture of the three, and they're smiling. They're smiling and shooting the quote unquote shooting the finger in the photograph. Now, whether or not they're in a fire station or not, I'm not sure. Of course, I would say their situation would actually be worse if they were in a fire station. But I'm not sure if they were or were not. And that's my report. Thank you.
Much obliged, retired firefighter in Florida. The CBS Miami report, I'm reading it. They include an extra paragraph. Midget. They include an extra paragraph. It reads, back in 2012, Miami-Dade Fire Captain Brian Beckman, suspected race soldier, was demoted after a Facebook post regarding the death of Trayvon Martin. Beckman eventually regained his rank of captain after appealing the decision. I would be curious to see exactly what he said. I'll see if I can find that before we exit. But even that right there, I've said consistently, race soldiers, metaphors, comparisons. Now, you have three non-white individuals who are wearing a t-shirt that says, F-U-C-K Trump, as opposed to the captain of the fire department making whatever comment he made about a teenager who was shot and killed, and that's comparable? Metaphor.
I have the quote if you would like for me to read it.
Let's hear it.
Brian Beckman had been demoted 2 ranks from captain to firefighter. This is a racist suspect. I would equate him to being exactly like in law enforcement, a race soldier. Demoted 2 ranks from captain to firefighter after ranting that urban youth are the products of failed, shitbag, ignorant, pathetic, welfare dependent excuses for parents. That's basically the statement that he, I think, posted on the internet. They say Miami firefighter, but that's confusing. He worked for the same fire department that I work for, Miami-Dade County Fire Department. This individual.
Thank you for the update, retired firefighter. You can come to your own conclusion. I could be ignorant. I did live under 8 years of that no good Obama. So, I have seen a lot of antics directed towards the person in the White House, particularly over the last 8 years. But anyway, I thought that there was a certain allowance for freedom of expression, especially for a voicing of grievances with elected officials. I thought that that was permissible. I certainly saw a lot of that. Like I said, when that no good Negro Obama was in the White House, I saw that sort of thing all the time, and very few people got punished. Again, I think that's substantially different, voicing your grievances with an elected official, and what you just heard about a murdered child. But, hey, I was appalled by the Harvard Business Review, so it's been quite a Thursday. Did other folks have comments that they wanted to get in? Oh, wait a minute. We had a person who wrote in. Listener wrote, now that I'm the only black person in my department, the racism has become noticeably blatant. My white male coworker who works the closest to me was flying under the radar because I was more focused on 2 white female coworkers who are mistreating me nonstop. What my white male coworker has been doing for years was that he would destroy, mess up a project, then transfer it to me. He only does this because he's well aware that they are monitoring me closely and I only get reprimanded. He never gets in trouble for all the mistakes he makes. He's well aware that they mistreat me and uses it to his advantage. I once went on vacation for 2 weeks. When I came back, I was handed a project he worked on the whole time I was out. When I got back, as usual, I'm being monitored. The white supremacist female manager reprimands me for the project because she claims I gave the client the wrong information, but when I compared my info to the information in the handbook, I was not wrong. It was actually my white coworker who was giving the client incorrect information the whole time. My racist white female boss only noticed this project was trash because she was watching me, although it was proven I did nothing wrong. She never reprimanded my white male coworker for the trash he created. She pretended none of it happened when confronted with evidence. This is one I'm reminded of Stacy in the UK and requesting a written retraction if there's been some sort of accusation that you did something wrong or violated policy, particularly if it sounded like they want to be serious and really get after you about this, and then it turns out that that was not the case and that they were incorrect. Written retraction. Continuing, the whites at my job only watch me and watch every little thing I do. I was sent a nasty email asking why I've not responded to any of my messages. Come to find out, my white male coworker was transferring messages to me while I was on my 2 weeks vacation. When I responded with proof, I never heard about the messages again. I asked, why did they not check the multiple messages my white coworker had? They did not respond. When my white male coworker left for his shift, I was able to take a photo of all his messages that were unanswered, and I made sure to print the email immediately once I received it, since they have the ability to retract the emails now. I did not know that, but that's constructive to know. I'm glad you were able to get the information that he had a lot of these unanswered emails, and it seems like at least from what I'm gathering from the email, it seems like you're doing an excellent job of making sure that you have evidence, that you are documenting, so when they come at you with these bogus, racist allegations, you don't have to jump up and down, you don't have to curse, you don't have to get emotional, you don't have to share any personal details. You can just follow logic and present evidence. What am I being accused of? Not giving correct information. Well, here's the information that I gave to the customers, and this is what the handbook says is correct information. They would seem to match. Let's see where the problem is. and just investigate. That's all you following logic, asking questions, investigating. That's what it seems like that works. I would not be looking ever for an apology or any of that, or, oh, we're so sorry. Written retraction. That's what I would request. I think that might encourage people to be a bit more careful with their accusations if they know it's not just going to be, oh, it's fine, we're still going out for tea, but, oh, I'm glad we were able to correct this, but I did get accused of wrongdoing. I would really appreciate a written retraction. Is it possible that I can get that, Ted, Frank, Miss Turner, whatever it is? Many other folks have final comment, suggestion before we wrap things up?
Can I be heard?
Codified software developer.
Yeah, just one little observation that I made. I was in a meeting on Monday, and it was a conference call. There was a non-white black male on the conference call in Philadelphia, and I noticed when I addressed him as Mr. So-and-so and Sir, which is a policy of mine to do, especially with black males, I noticed the white males in the room and on the call becoming very agitated with me, answering me very shortly. So I thought that was interesting. I think I'm going to continue calling that black male Mr. So-and-so and Sir, just to see what happens. With that, I'll mute my line. Thanks.
Black self-respect, Mr. Fuller, and I've heard others who have had the same experience when they're just practicing black self-respect and doing what they normally do. They say sir, ma'am to everyone, white, non-white, but seeing a black person do that to another black person, I've heard many who said that has seemed to really irk racists. Like, how dare you reserve some sort of, courtesy and respect even for this nigga. Oh, I'm appalled. And then I have to say, I've heard that repeatedly. With that, we did our 3 hours. We will be here normal program time. Teacher training is almost done. Finish line is nigh. 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific for the book club. Tomorrow evening, Zora Neale Hurston, Barracoon, the story of the last black cargo. Halfway done with the book already. Very short. Moving on to the next book. Compensatory call-in will be here Saturday, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. Looking forward. We'll review what happened the last 7 days. Racist jokes. I'm so excited. That's coming up on the compensatory call-in. 10 years. That's been a focus from day one here at the Cows. Racist jokes. Saturday, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. Much obliged to everyone tuning in. Neutralizing Workplace Racism. I hope it has been worthy of your time and energy, although I think we did a lot better than the Harvard Business Review. Remain codified even if you are frolicking for the last few days of summer. Get out, enjoy the warm weather. If you're going to be in Seattle for next Friday, you can come to Gus T's yoga class. Wear your counter-racist t-shirt and frolic in sunny Seattle while summer is winding down. Either way, remain codified. Even if you're on the job and you have to go out for some of those events, sobriety would be best under conditions of white terrorism. Dr. Welsing and many of the folks that we esteem would strongly recommend, let's stay sober, let's practice mental health, take care of our brain computers, so that we can crank out solutions, new concepts to solve the problem, white supremacy, racism. Certainly, in addition to being sober, let us be buckled up every single time we are in a vehicle, driver or passenger. Let's do all that we can to minimize contact with race soldiers, badge or no. That's it, Creator. We ask that you help us remain patient with other black people, victims of white supremacy. We ask that you help us remain patient with ourselves. Remind us to demonstrate the highest levels of black self-respect at all times, in all places, each and every time we are in contact with another black person. It has been time. Replace white supremacy with justice immediately. Cal signing out. Thanks all for tuning in.
Nigga, you so brainwashed. I'm a victim, brother. Problem. You're a victim. I'm a victim of 400 years of conditioning. Shut up. The man has programmed my conditioning. Even my conditioning has been conditioned.